How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Mention it, or should we just like go on as usual, as if nothing's different?
See if anybody actually notices. That sounded meaner than I meant it to. I didn't mean that to sound so jerky when I said it. Anyway, I guess we'll start now. Let's see. Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. That pause you just heard was me trying to find the intro because I still haven't gotten it memorized. We're the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult genre films. We do all the research so that you don't have to. We're the three guys, or are we, that tell you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horne.
Hey, I'm your other host, Justin Bishop, and we are noticeably absent today is Mr. Todd A. Davis, who is recovering from surgery. Get well soon, Todd. He had surgery on his butthole, I think.
He did. Hopefully we can share that. You'll probably know that he had surgery because I'm sure there'll be an Instagram post, another one, telling you that he'll continue to be dying until you give him money. So.
Well, I mean, I think on our Panic Room episode, he did talk about some of his butt troubles. But yeah, he'll post an Instagram post of acupuncture needles in his butthole.
That is. I hope that he does not do that.
It's gonna look like the Dune popcorn bucket.
That is disturbing to think about. And if I'm gonna get flagged for crap on social media, then Todd's butthole should get flagged for sure. I don't think it's fair.
It's not. Justice for Gary's memes. Anyway, so yes, Todd's not here today, unfortunately, but he will be back hopefully by the next episode if he's not traveling or something. I don't know. We're planning on him being here for the next episode. But get well soon, Todd. Hope you're listening to this episode. I don't think he listens to the show, actually.
Ringing endorsement from Todd Davis.
Well, welcome to the 7th and final episode of our series, David Fincher, Rules of the Game. This is it. This is the last one. Do you think we should talk about David Fincher more in the future? Should we talk about Benjamin Button and Gone Girl and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and The Killer and Mank? And I think I named them all. I think that's all of them.
I think it's great that we've done 7. So the start of this feels right. And then, I do. I think we could easily come back to Fincher. Just like I feel that way after we break it off with every one of our director friends that we've talked about for so long. We've got a lot.
1 year, we're just gonna have to spend a full calendar year just talking about directors we've already discussed, but from where after we cut off.
Yeah, except Jodorowsky.
Yeah, well, yeah. We won't do another Jodorowsky series. Although those later films of his, except for that stupid documentary of his later films are really good. I watched them when we were doing that series. I watched his last couple. I watched all of them, and they're some of his best work, in my opinion.
He was starting to get better for me. The Santa Sangre was feeling more like I can handle this.
Yeah. You'd be able to handle the later movies as well, I think. But we're not talking about Alejandro Jodorowsky today. We're talking about David Fincher. And on our last episode, of course, we talked about Panic Room, and we discussed Panic Room's success. It was his most successful film since Seven, at least, box office wise. What's notable about that is that with Panic Room, David Fincher had created a crowd-pleasing popcorn movie, which is not something he had tried to really create before that. And it was a much-needed hit after the disappointment of Fight Club. So after Panic Room's success, he could have simply rested on his laurels and continued to make blockbusters of that fashion, things that he knew were going to be crowd pleasers. And he certainly had plenty of them to choose from because he was getting a lot of offers. And David Fincher has been attached to a ton of projects over the years, not just after Panic Room, but between all of his films, he's a guy who he gets a lot of offers and he explores a lot of possibilities. And after Panic Room, those offers were really pouring in because, like I said, it made a ton of money. Not long after that film's release, just a month or so after, he actually started being courted by Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise started courting David Fincher as a possible director of the third Mission Impossible movie. He was also briefly attached to David Benioff's script for Stay, which was later directed by Mark Forster in 2005. And he briefly replaced director Fred Durst. Yes, that Fred Durst, as the director of the skateboarding biopic Lords of Dogtown, which was later done by Catherine Hardwicke, who is probably now better known for directing the first Twilight movie, unfortunately. But Fincher went in a pretty different direction. He pursued a project that could not be more different than Panic Room, or really from any of the other projects he was being offered. Or, for that matter, it couldn't be more different from any of the other films that he had directed so far. For his next project, Fincher tackled a story based on actual events and one that explored the investigation into a series of unsolved murders in Northern California in the late 1960s. Today, for our final episode in this series, we are talking about David Fincher's 2007 true crime drama, Zodiac.
Dear editor, this is the murderer of the two teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July.
I want you to print this cipher on the front page of your paper.
He wants his code in the afternoon edition.
Graysmith, don't you have a cartoon to finish?
The Zodiac Killer has come to San Francisco.
Another letter.
School children make nice targets.
He gave himself a name.
Morse code, astrological signs. This guy's used them all.
I like puzzles. I do them a lot.
Got any hard suspects?
About 90 an hour. I'm up to around 500.
You got 4 crime scenes, not a single usable print. You can't think of this case in normal police terms.
I just want to help.
What are you, some kind of Boy Scout?
Eagle Scout, actually.
God save us all.
There's no evidence, Robert.
What do you mean there's no evidence? You have him seen with the ciphers, the military boot prints, the bloody knife.
All circumstantial.
Why do you need to do this?
Because nobody else will.
Dave, you made a mistake!
Get away from the window.
Paul, are you okay?
No.
Why'd you do it? You put your face out there for him to see.
Hello? Who is this?
Here is your spoiler warning. We're going to talk about the movie in detail. So if you haven't seen it, first, go and see it. Second, if you don't know who the Zodiac Killer really is, it's Ted Cruz.
Yes. Well, good thing you put up a spoiler alert before that.
Right.
Before revealing that information. I was wondering how long it would be before we made a Ted Cruz joke. So I'm really glad you got that out of the way right off the bat.
I didn't have any intention to, but as we were getting ramped up to start here, I was like, it feels like you have to.
You have to. If you're talking about Zodiac, at some point you have to bring up Ted Cruz. So the Zodiac Killer, we're not going to do a full-on deep dive into the Zodiac Killer because the movie does a pretty good job of that. And there are millions of documentaries and things like that about the Zodiac Killer. But just briefly, the Zodiac Killer, for those who are unaware, is a pseudonym of a still officially unidentified serial killer who murdered 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area in 1968 and 1969, is suspected of several other murders, and claimed to have killed at least 37 people.
He's definitely one of those guys that really likes to talk about how big his kill list is.
Yeah, he may be a little insecure.
Yeah, there you go.
And the Zodiac case is arguably the most famous unsolved murder case in American history. The public's fascination with it isn't necessarily due to the body count, which is lower than other, less well-known serial killers, nor is it due to the brutality of his crimes. Not to discount how brutal his crimes were, but he's not like Jeffrey Dahmer, eating people. It's not sensationalistic. He's shooting people, or in one case, stabbing them. He's not, dismantling the bodies and eating them and doing all kinds of weird stuff. So that had nothing to do with why people continue to be so fascinated with this case. but rather the fascination with Zodiac is largely due to his own self-aggrandizing nature. One of the most famous aspects of this whole case are the letters that he mailed to local newspapers, which included cryptograms and ciphers, unfulfilled threats of further large-scale violence, and passages where he claimed that he was collecting his victims to be his slaves in the afterlife. And these letters also seem to taunt the San Francisco PD as if he had a specific vendetta against them.
It sounds like you're taunting him.
The
Like
Zodiac?
Yeah.
He could still be out there. We don't know. He could be listening to this podcast right now. He'd be a very old and feeble man, though, if that were.
I was going to say, hopefully, if we offend him in any way, he is, if he was in his
like
prime
90
in 68 and 69, then yeah, he's going to be slower than even Michael Myers getting around, the neighborhood.
Well, the cryptic nature of the Zodiac letters have fascinated investigators, both professional and amateur, for more than half a century now, leading to many wild theories about the killer's identity. And one of the leading experts on the Zodiac case is author Robert Graysmith, who worked for the San Francisco Chronicle at the time of the murders and was in the room when the first Zodiac letter arrived at the newspaper. Professionally, Graysmith worked as a political cartoonist at the Chronicle, but he'd held a lifelong fascination with puzzles and code breaking, a fascination that prompted him to attempt to decode the Zodiac letters, which led to his becoming obsessed with the case for the next decade or so, even after official investigations into the murders had slowed down.
Do you think the first Zodiac letter came in and he was just like, this is it? This is my moment. Do you think he had that thought?
I've been doing puzzles my whole life. Like I've been training for this kind of thing.
There's two different ways to look at it. Because I loved the Smashing Pumpkins and I love wrestling. So when I wanted to start a wrestling podcast, I was trying to figure out how to make it different than other wrestling podcasts. And then Billy Corgan bought the NWA. So then it was like, oh, that's it. That's the one.
Sense.
I'm going to do this. And then it's led to everything now, which is cool. But I wonder when he first saw the puzzle come in, if he was just like, this is everything I've ever wanted.
I don't know. I feel like he's more like, I think for him, it was more just like the need to solve the puzzle, the need to figure it out more than the need for any other kind of recognition or anything like that,
Yeah. So he probably didn't see himself getting as deep as he did, maybe.
Yeah. Well, Graysmith's independent investigation into the Zodiac case resulted in the writing of the first major book about the Zodiac Killer, aptly titled Zodiac. That was published in 1986. And then he later published a follow-up called Zodiac Unmasked in 2002, in which he claimed to reveal the true identity of the Zodiac. Now, eventually, Graysmith's work on the Zodiac case led to him giving up his career as a cartoonist to pursue one as a true crime writer. And over the years, he's written books on several prominent cases, including one on Jack the Ripper and another one on the Unabomber. Another of his books became the basis for Paul Schrader's 2002 film Autofocus, which tells the story of the murder of Hogan's Hero star Bob Crane. Have you ever seen that?
I have not seen that.
It's really good. Greg Kinnear plays Bob Crane in it. It's a great movie. But definitely, from what I remember, I saw it when it came out in 2002. And I don't think I've watched it since, but I remember enjoying it. And I remember getting some pretty good accolades, some really good reviews at the time.
Well, whether or not he meant to, Graysmith, obviously he found his niche.
He certainly did. He found out that he was good at it, I guess, through the writing of the Zodiac book. And then in the late 1990s, the film rights to Graysmith's first Zodiac book were sold to screenwriter Shane Salerno, who'd first read it as a teenager. Salerno, who was in his early 20s when he began working on Zodiac, was considered kind of a rising star in the screenwriting world, having sold 4 projects in 1997 alone, and had been hired to do rewrites on Jonathan Mastel's Breakdown, which we've mentioned like 3 times during the series somehow, and also Michael Bay's Armageddon. And now Salerno has been personally picked, by the way, by James Cameron to write all of the Avatar sequels, starting with The Way of Water. He's James Cameron's co-writer on all those. Salerno signed a deal with Touchstone Pictures to co-produce and write a film based on Graysmith's Zodiac research, and he worked on several drafts of the screenplay. And although I haven't been able to find any copies of these drafts anywhere, according to Stuart Hazeldine, who was a screenwriter who was approached to do some rewrites on the project, this is according to a tweet from him from a few years ago, he says that Salerno's script would have been about the Zodiac Killer resurfacing in modern-day San Francisco. So it seems kind of to me like Salerno was using the real-life history of the killer as the basis for a fictional continuation of the story.
That's like The Town That Dreaded Sundown, that new one that came out. And they did like the original story, but it's like a sequel, but but in the sequel, they're watching the movie The Town That Dreaded Sunday. It's not the same.
Oh, so
but
the sequel
I'm trying
still
to connect it.
exists.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
Very meta. I haven't seen it. I've seen the original, but I haven't seen the new one.
It's it's whatever.
A ringing endorsement from Gary Horne.
You're not. Your life is still just as complete as it was
before seeing it. Okay. Well, this project, this Zodiac project, spent years in development hell at Touchstone before several administrative changes at the studio and at its parent company, which is Disney, derailed the project, and the rights eventually lapsed.
At that time, it's probably hard to think of Disney wanting to greenlight a serial killer movie, as awesome as that premise kind of sounds. I kind of do feel bad for Salerno, though, not being able to stay with the gig since he had been a fan for so long. Like I was reading stories about like literally in high school, he had like the book confiscated by teachers because he was like sneaking it in or something. They didn't want him reading that crap or something. And he's obviously a big fan and had developed like such an affinity for Graysmith that I guess they had like a good rapport, and he got the promise of the rights like when he was like 19 years old. Graysmith promised, okay, well, when you become like a screenwriter, I promise you'll be the guy. I should say I would feel bad about him. Not that I do. The deal with Touchstone Disney was like for like 7 figures. So I'd love for somebody to pay me that much not to write something. Right. And like you mentioned, now he's James Cameron's dude for the Avatar sequel. So he's fine. Never mind. Let's move on.
Yeah. Fuck that guy. I'm just kidding in case you're listening, Shane. I love the Avatar movies. Salerno, though, was not the only future screenwriter who developed a fascination with Graysmith's book. James Vanderbilt had also read the book when he was in high school and had always dreamed of adapting it into a film. And he was especially taken with Graysmith as a character. Graysmith had it kind of unwittingly placed himself at the center of the Zodiac story, not in the way that he wrote the book, but just in the fact that he was kind of there, if that makes sense. And the idea of a cartoonist becoming obsessed with a serial killer had this weird fish out of water quality to it that Vanderbilt really found appealing. When he started trying to pitch this idea, he sold it by saying that, what if Gary Trudeau tried to solve Son of Sam? That was kind of his angle that he wanted to come at with this. Now, Vanderbilt's career as a screenwriter had really taken off in 2003 when 3 of his screenplays were produced into films. And those films are all vastly different. They are Darkness Falls, which is the horror movie about
the Tooth Fairy. The
Tooth Fairy. Yeah. Basic, which is the John Travolta, Sam Jackson movie that's not Pulp Fiction. And The Rundown, which is, The Rock, which is a great movie, honestly. But none of those would make you think that he would be the guy to adapt Zodiac. But in meetings with agents and development executives, he'd always tell them that writing a movie based on Graysmith's book was kind of his dream project. And then when he found out that the rights were, they had lapsed at Touchstone, so they were once again available, he pitched his idea for an adaptation to Mike Medavoy and Brad Fisher of Phoenix Pictures, who had produced Basic based on his screenplay.
This guy is super interesting when you start going down the rabbit hole of Vanderbilt, because he's a member of the Vanderbilt family, which, if you don't know, think Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. His great maybe another great grandfather was Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was like, I think maybe possibly the second richest person ever in American history.
Wow.
His uncle or great uncle, I can't remember which one, he built like the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. Yeah. His dad was a successful musician, did a lot of public relations work, and had a lot of ties with like the Grammys. Anyway, sure, kid, become a screenwriter. I guess he could have done worse. He could have been just a rich asshole, I guess.
Yeah, I guess at least he's trying to do something with his life.
I will say I was surprised by his other work when I was reading this, because I did not know his name straight out. And a lot of those movies I honestly love. I am an unabashed defender of Darkness Falls, and I fucking love The Rundown. He also did Scream 5 and 6. And 6 is like
so
one of my favorites.
Like he's been doing great stuff even recently. Yeah, he is the screenwriter of those most recent ones. And he also did, just to tie him back to some other stuff we've talked about on the podcast, but he did The Amazing Spider-Man, which is not the one we talked about, but
yeah, with Andrew Garfield. So should I do another Laura Ziskin rant?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to. Go for it.
I will say Dermot Mulroney is in Scream 6, and he's in Zodiac. So there's another connection for you. I don't know. Also, Ready or Not. He did Ready or Not. So he
Did
wrote
he
that,
write,
right?
Did he write Ready or Not? I don't know. I mean, it's the same directors as Screen 5 and 6, but I don't think he wrote it.
All right. We're going to find out right now.
He
Who
produced
wrote
it.
Ready
I just
or
looked it up.
Not? Oh, well, fine. Why'd you get ahead of me? I
he
got
produced
something
it.
about the Fugees. So the Fugees came up, and I don't.
That was written by Lauryn Hill and Wyclef Jean. Yes.
Right. Different. Anyway, dude's a fun screenwriter. Could have been worse. Could have been a super wealthy D-bag. Maybe he is. What do I know? Oh, and he did White House Down. So if you haven't seen that, Don't Hate Fun, you should see that movie.
That's great.
That's a
I love it. I'm glad you like that because I feel like not enough people go to bat for White House Down. It's Die Hard in the White House.
Yeah, it's so he's a good screenwriter, you know, for fun movies.
Yeah, and this one,
And
which
Zodiac.
is fun. I love this movie, but I would hesitate to call it fun.
Right.
But anyway, so when he got to work on this, Vanderbilt was pretty open with Medavoy and Fisher about his expectations for the project because he had been unhappy with the way that some of his screenplays had been meddled with in the past, and he was especially bothered with how the ending of Basic had been changed. So when he pitched Zodiac to the producers, he offered to write a spec script for it, but with the caveat that he maintain creative control on the project. So Medavoy and Fisher agreed to this, and Vanderbilt was brought on not only as a screenwriter, but as a producer as well.
That's where he got his producer legs, I guess, then. So now...
Yeah, I guess this was probably, as far as I know, his first gig as a producer. Yeah, I think so.
That's pretty cool. You get in as a screenwriter on something you've always wanted to do and become a producer. I don't know. I'm happy for the guy.
Yeah,
you know?
good job.
I'm sure the money had nothing to do with it, did it, Vanderbilt?
He didn't need the money. He's a Vanderbilt.
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe he could buy his way into getting what he wants.
Well, maybe. He's like, I'll throw you guys a few bones if you put me on as a producer. Yeah.
I know, for the record, you know, the Vanderbilt family disowned him like years ago. So I don't know. But I don't know how much money he's got.
So at this point, they still needed the rights to the book because remember, they had kind of the option had lapsed over at Touchstone, but nobody else had bought them yet. So Fisher and Vanderbilt attended the premiere of Autofocus, where they knew that Robert Graysmith would be in attendance. And they met with Graysmith and pitched him their idea for a Zodiac movie, one that was steeped in the facts of the case rather than sensationalization or using it as the jumping off point for a fictional story. And Graysmith liked what they were saying. And that meeting ended up leading to Phoenix Pictures optioning the rights not only to Zodiac, but to his follow-up, Zodiac Unmasked, as well. So with the project underway, they began considering potential directors, and David Fincher's name was at the top of their list. Now, they didn't have a lot of hope that he'd be interested in doing it because they kind of assumed that he wouldn't want to do another serial killer movie. But just to be sure, they sent him an early draft of the script.
Now, I will say, if you're an avid listener of Cinema Shock, you know that there's a chance here. Well, and you're listening to this episode, so obviously, I guess you know it worked out. But anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
you know, there's a pretty good chance. The movie got made.
I was just meaning, like, back in the day, we did have a little conversation about this on the episodes.
So. Exactly, yeah. So anyway, what they did not realize, and what Gary's alluding to, was that David Fincher, like Vanderbilt, had also held a lifelong fascination with the Zodiac case, but his interest in it came from a more personal place. See, Fincher had grown up in the Bay Area when the killings were happening. Now, he was too young to really follow the specifics of the case, but he speaks about there being kind of an aura of danger during this time. In interviews, he recalls the time when he first became aware of Zodiac. He said he was about 7 years old, and he noticed that his school bus had a police escort. And when he asked his dad about it, his dad said, and now this is a quote from Fincher quoting his dad, so I don't know if he was truly this nonchalant about it, but this is the way Fincher put it. He said his dad said, "Oh, that's right. There's a guy who murdered 4 people, and he sent a letter to the newspaper threatening to shoot out the tires of a school bus and kill the children on it." So that statement, as you can imagine, stuck with Fincher, and it would probably fucking traumatize any 7-year-old in the world.
You always remember your first serial killer threatening to murder you moment. It's a special time in every young boy's life. It's like a quinceañera or something.
It's like a bar mitzvah.
Right. I will say Vanderbilt, in one interview I read, he said more of his concern was that what you talked about earlier, that Fincher has like all these projects. And so I think his exact quote actually in the interview was, Fincher dates a lot, but he doesn't get married very often.
Right.
So, yeah. So he gets attached to tons of stuff. Doesn't always make the shit he's attached to.
Right, exactly. So at the time that development on Zodiac was ramping up, Fincher was actually attached to another project already. He was attached to an adaptation of James Ellroy's The Black Dahlia, which itself was a novel based on a real-life unsolved murder case, although Ellroy's, his book is fictionalized and it provides a solution to the crime that didn't exist in real life. That project was, of course, later adapted by Brian De Palma, although this is interesting. Fincher did revisit the material in 2013. He co-wrote a graphic novel with a French writer named Motz, I think it's how you say it, which is the pen name of Alexis Nolant. And it was also, apparently, it's written all in French. I guess it was translated from whatever Fincher wrote. But Motz, however you say it, Alexis Nolant, had also written the comic book that served as the basis for Fincher's film The Killer, which is his most recent film as of this recording. Now, this has nothing to do with Zodiac at all. This is just me going down a rabbit hole, and I thought it was really interesting that he revisited it with, the guy who did The Killer.
I saw like an article even more recent than that talked about they had still considered it. Like Fincher was still like batting it around or something. But that Black Dahlia thing at the time, it was going to be like a 5-episode miniseries, and I think it was for HBO or something, but it was like, it was budgeted, like they had it estimated like $80 million, which seems pretty normal now. But I think at that time, that was kind of early in that big time TV, huge epic stuff. So maybe it was too pricey and I guess it couldn't get financed. So maybe that's why.
Maybe. And if that's funny, because now if he were trying to do that, he'd probably be able to get it greenlit in a heartbeat, especially, after doing Mindhunter, and he's done a couple other TV shows. Love and Robots he produced.
TV's pretty big for him now. Like he's, it seems
House
like
of Cards.
Path of least resistance here for him in a lot of ways. The French guy, Motz, apparently Fincher's like a huge comic book fan anyway. And that was another kind of drawing power thing for him about Robert Graysmith's story. I guess Fincher says as a kid, like some of his biggest heroes were actually cartoonists. A guy named like Bob Bastian was somebody he really idolized that worked for San Francisco Chronicle during his time as the cartoonist for them. He had gotten so far along. I saw an interview with Motz, or read an interview with Motz translated, but the reason that Fincher is co-credited there is that they know each other and they were like talking it out. And Fincher had so much stuff already done because we know like he likes to pre-plan so much. And Motz was like wanting to write the story, but then he had questions about like, I don't know how to get through this one thing or get through this other thing. And Fincher already had it all, like basically he could just lay out like, this is what this would look like. This is the scene. And so he said he just took so much from Fincher's notes and his advice and like how he was going to shoot it. He was like, Fincher basically designed all the panels of the thing. And like, it's just, because it's just kind of visualized based on what he was talking about.
That's pretty rad. I would like to read it. I'm assuming there's got to be an English translation of it out there.
Yeah, I would hope so. I was kind of interested in that too. David Fincher is also a huge fan of hentai. I made that up.
Could be true.
It might be true. I don't know.
Who knows? We can't prove that it's not true.
That's right.
Just because you don't have the proof doesn't mean it's not true.
Making a lot of friends this episode we are in Hollywood. Like, who are these guys? They're just making shit up about us.
Talking shit. Well, anyway, when the Black Dahlia project fell apart, Fincher began to seriously consider Zodiac. And he met with Vanderbilt and he told him, he said, I've done a serial killer movie and I'm not interested in repeating myself. I see something closer to All the President's Men. It's a newspaper story. Vanderbilt thought, hey, he gets it. That's what we want to do. He knew that Fincher was the guy to bring this story to the screen, and Fincher signed on to the project officially in early 2005.
You just watched All the President's Men. I haven't seen that, but
I did. I watched it because I just kept seeing it brought up during the research on this episode, and it's one that I've been wanting to watch, especially because of this David Fincher series. I also watched Clute and The Parallax View, both of which were movies that were cited as inspirations for his films, especially visually with Gordon Willis's cinematography. And all of those movies are directed by Alan J. Pakula, who also did All the President's Men. So I'd already watched the first two movies in what's considered Pakula's Paranoia trilogy, and I loved both of them. I mean, both of those blew me away. So I'm like, well, All the President's Men is his most well-known movie, probably. So if I love those other two, I'll probably enjoy this one as well. And turns out It's fucking great. It's a great fucking movie. It deserves all the accolades that it's received, and it's one of those that it was just one of those big blind spots for me, like one of those big movies that I'd never gotten around to watching, and I'm glad I did. It is really fantastic. And when you watch it, you will undoubtedly see how it influenced this movie, especially the first act of this movie that's a little more like newspaper centric,
Yeah, you sent me some screenshots of the movies, and
the side by sides.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I actually, when you sent them to me, I just thought you were sending me pictures of Zodiac, like the movie, and I was just like, why is he just sending me screenshots of Zodiac?
Yeah.
He was trying to side-by-side comparison for me. Now, I will say, to your point about the quote, well, not your point, I mean, it's Vanderbilt's quote, that Fincher said, I've done a serial killer movie. If I'm not interested in repeating myself. In 2006, I remember this. I was pretty excited because I was huge into comics during that time. Fincher says that, but he was attached. He was supposed to be the guy that did Torso, which is a graphic novel by Brian Michael Bendis, who is my favorite comic book writer ever. And it's about the Cleveland torso murderer who was doing some nasty shit back in the 30s. And the story's really cool, by the way. You can get it right now on graphic novel. It's like he's there, he's doing all these killings, they can't figure out who it is. Elliot Ness gets brought in to hunt him
Based
down.
on a true story?
Yeah, all true story. And ends up being like kind of a cat and mouse thing. Like this murderer is like taunting Elliot Ness, and him and his men are trying to like find this guy. Anyway, and then it all fell apart. Like it didn't even work out. And Bendis wrote a graphic novel about that called Fortune and Glory, and it is all about his time spent dealing with Hollywood and trying to get Torso made. And writing the script for it and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm just saying, Fincher be courting serial killers his whole career, actually.
Sure.
So.
I mean, and, the Black Dahlia, not a serial killer, but obviously a murderer. Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, not exactly a serial killer story, but it is definitely like, in that vein of in a similar genre to something like Seven. You know what I mean?
Right.
Right.
So exactly.
It's not like he's completely, avoiding crime movies. I mean, I'd say.
Well, and Mindhunter has happened now. We've seen
right,
Mindhunter
yeah, which is like the ultimate serial killer TV show. Yeah, exactly. But it's approached from a different angle than something like Seven, which this is as well. This is not a serial killer movie. I mean, he's right. This is a movie about the investigation of a serial killer more than anything.
Oh, it's 100%. These two guys had to be on the same page in their vision of what this movie would be, because it's not what I think most people would expect it to be.
Right. It's not sensationalized at all. And that's why I think it's a good comparison with All the President's Men, which is about the reporters who uncovered Watergate. So it's also based on a true story. You see Watergate very briefly in the film. You see the burglars and you see the police come and bust them and everything. But that's a very, very small amount of the movie. Just like in this, the murders are a small amount of the movie. The 3 murders that we see happen in the first half an hour of the movie. And this is a almost 3-hour long movie. So like the rest of the movie, there's no violence, there aren't any car chases, there aren't any other murders. Like it's all about the investigation. And that's what All the President's Men is about as well. I mean, it's about these guys following up leads. It's a lot of people talking and conversations. A lot of people talking on the phone and interviewing people and going to their houses and interviewing people. Like it's very similar in structure to, they meet up. And one thing I noticed between the two is that in this movie, they meet up in Zodiac, like Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr. or Jake Gyllenhaal and Mark Ruffalo, they'll meet up to discuss the project, but it's always like in little restaurants and stuff. Like they're always in restaurants or bars. And in All the President's Men, there are multiple scenes where Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman are meeting up to discuss the story, and they're meeting up in, it's a McDonald's. It's an old McDonald's that they meet in like constantly over and over. That's just like their meeting place. And that's another thing that in this movie felt very intentional, that they were trying to like call back to even something that subtle, call back to All the President's Men. I
did read though that there was a place that all the newspaper guys during the Zodiac thing did go to and hang out, which is not the people investigating necessarily. These were just all the San Francisco Chronicle people that you see, like that bar that they ended up going to. Yeah, but it's not really called Morty's. They wouldn't let them call it, or they didn't want to call it the same thing because Robert Downey Jr. does coke in the bar.
Right? Yeah. So once he was officially signed on to the project, Fincher got to work, and in his first meeting with Fincher, producer Brad Fisher recalled the director walking in and saying, "Hey, my hat's off to you guys for taking this massive amount of information and putting it all into this 158-page document. Now let's put the script in a drawer and go up to the Bay Area and meet every single person who was involved in the investigation. So for all intents and purposes, Fincher was wanting them to just start from scratch. They had a script, a 158-page script, but he knew that this was a case where there was a lot of speculation and hearsay, but Fincher wasn't interested in making a movie about all the conspiracy theories surrounding the Zodiac. He was interested in the cold, hard facts and in portraying the truth as accurately as possible. So with that in mind, Fincher, Vanderbilt, and Fisher began conducting their own private investigation into the case.
You know, another thing that drew him to the movie is he talks about in the commentary growing up in the area that it felt like, you know, the whole Zodiac thing was like this huge deal. So it was like he says it becomes like a very personal thing. And he talks about when he was 12, he saw Dirty Harry for the first time, and he was, his words, appalled. He was like, I know how much of an impact this whole thing had, all the people that were like involved in it, like how many lives it changed, you know? And in this movie, it's like this, it's just like a plot device. And so that was something he really wanted to correct, I guess.
Sure. He even gets to take a shot at Dirty Harry in the movie. I mean, he shows how frustrated Dave Toschi is when he watches Dirty Harry in Zodiac, you know, because he's just like, what the fuck, man? Like, this guy's still out there killing people and they're making a movie about it. I love Dirty Harry, though. I think it's great.
No, I do too. And I was like, but I never thought about it from that lens. Also, I don't think I ever realized until all of this that it was still happening at the time, which is kind of wild to think about.
That is kind of wild. Yeah, it is very wild. It wasn't the only one that was made during that. Did you read about the one called the Zodiac Killer? I think I might have sent you a link about it.
Yeah, I know that you didn't watch that?
I haven't watched it yet. No, I've got it available to me, but I haven't. I was going to watch it, and I decided to rewatch this movie instead yesterday. But the Zodiac Killer is this little low budget movie that came out in, I want to say 1970 or 71. But the producers of it thought that they could use it to catch the real Zodiac Killer, because the real Zodiac Killer, as they found out over the course of the investigation, is kind of a movie guy. He's into movies. He references movies a lot in his letters and stuff, even more so than what they touch on in this movie. Because part of my research on this episode was to listen to the audiobook of Robert Graysmith's Zodiac book. So I've got a lot of Zodiac on the brain right now. And he talks about this movie in his book, actually, the Zodiac Killer movie, obviously not this movie because he doesn't have a time machine, but the Zodiac Killer movie from 1971, he talks about it in there. And this independent producer basically created this movie about the Zodiac Killer, and he wears the costume in it, you know, with like the mask and the Zodiac symbol on his chest that we see him use one time during this movie. They would set up, they only showed it in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's the only place it played theatrically. And they set up boxes in the lobby where you could register to win a motorcycle, but you had to fill out these cards that would say, in 25 words or less, why do you think the Zodiac kills? And you would fill that out and put it in the thing. And then they had a police officer hiding in the boxes with a walkie-talkie. And if he had like a flashlight and a walkie-talkie inside the box. So if somebody dropped one in that he felt was suspicious, he'd get on his walkie-talkie and tell other policemen who were like working the theater undercover, hey, go look for the person who just put in the letter in the box. And nothing came of it, of course. The producer even put out, I think, basically like a reward of $100,000 or something for anyone who could help them find the Zodiac Killer. Like, this guy was determined to find the Zodiac Killer using his movie. It's a really wild story. But yes, I have not watched the movie yet. AGFA put it out. The American Genre Film Archive put it out a while back. So it's pretty easily available, and it's streaming on Arrow. So I might watch it when we get done here today. Who knows?
No, that sounds fun. I like the idea of the guy hiding in the box. Like, I know. For anybody wondering, that's what happens to your mail-in ballots, by the way, according to Trump and Dinesh D'Souza or whatever. There's
just somebody waiting on them there, ripping up with a little shredder.
Yeah,
right. So anyway, they're conducting this investigation, and over the next 18 months, they retraced the killer's footsteps with several police officers who had worked the investigation. They combed through 10,000 pages of documents and evidence, and they interviewed witnesses and surviving victims, relatives of the victims who didn't survive, and even family members of one of the prime suspects. They even went so far as to hire a private investigator to track down Mike Mageau, who is the teenager that we see shot in the opening of the film. Mageau, obviously traumatized by the Zodiac attack, did not handle it well. and he had dropped off the map in the years following the crimes. I mean, they even discussed that in the movie. And he had spent much of that time largely living on the streets. And when they tracked him down to interview him for the movie, he was in jail in Las Vegas.
It's so insane to me that after all the studio meddling that Fincher has gone through, that they just go for like a year and a half investigating shit for themselves.
Yeah.
It's like Vanderbilt said in the one interview, like he was like, we kept expecting somebody to stop us, but nobody ever did. So it's crazy. I mean, I get why he's doing it. I don't think since Alien 3, at least, Fincher has had a project that he can't completely see in his head before he even bothers going to film. He needs every single detail down, and we saw how adamant he got about that in Panic Room. One detail he left out, though, that I thought was pretty great here was that Mike Mageau guy. Apparently, in the car, he thought it was this chick's husband, and says he literally said the line, "I'm not getting shot over this." And Fincher took that out. He didn't want to use that.
He should have. I mean, because he did is the thing.
That's the irony of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to get into like the details on this story, you understand why there are so many theories and things about this, because it definitely, and Fincher does a good job of portraying some of these things, and like in this movie, like the uncertainty surrounding the case, because you get the sense in that first scene that Darlene Ferrin, there's somebody who's like she's worried about, you know what I mean? And a lot of the theories surrounding this case indicate that she knew, even if the other victim didn't, that she knew the killer, which as the movie goes on, we find out that she, may have known Arthur Lee Allen and all this stuff. But that's where it's funny how at the beginning of the movie, he kind of hints at that. Like, she's like, oh, don't worry about that. Like it's like she knows whose car it is almost, Yeah. And I like that Fincher plays into some of that uncertainty without giving answers, because there aren't answers really to be given. Now, one of the things that Fincher was really adamant about when they were working on the script was using real names. In Graysmith's book, he would often use pseudonyms, especially when he implicated people as possible suspects. Like Arthur Lee Allen is referred to as Bob Starr in the book. But Fincher, wanting, again, to be as truthful as possible, he didn't want to go that route, but doing so meant that he had to verify every piece of information in the script using at least two sources. He wasn't going to posthumously, I always have a hard time with that word. He didn't want to implicate somebody as a possible murderer, without there being at least a couple of different sources that kind of point in that direction.
He's making a newspaper movie and he's journalisming.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what he's trying to do.
Exactly. And sometimes his sources were in the form of interviews, although that wasn't always reliable, because they might interview two different people. One of them would confirm aspects of the story while another one contradicted them. Not to mention they're talking to these people, decades after the fact. So they had to take unreliable memory into account as well. But anytime that there was a conflict or a doubt, any kind of doubt whatsoever, they went back to the police reports for confirmation. And the research that Fincher's team did on the film was so thorough that they often highlighted evidence in the case that had previously been ignored or completely forgotten.
Yeah, I was reading that, just this movie alone kind of reinvigorated the case, because there was just so much stuff they put together that people had just, I don't know, nobody had laid it out or something. Yeah. I don't know, but it kind of restarted everything, which is kind of neat to think about.
Well, and Fincher said that some of the people that they interviewed were like more willing to talk to them than they were when they were interviewed by the police. He's like, I guess it's nicer to when somebody's making a movie than the eighth investigator to interview you from the police department. It's a little more of a pleasant experience. So they were willing to talk to them a little bit more and more open with them than they even were with the official police interviews. So they could have gotten more information out of them.
Well, imagine also that you're in the period where the Zodiac Killer's stalking around and you don't know who the hell he is or where he's at or what he's doing.
Yeah, you don't really want to talk about it.
You want to have a little distance. Yeah. Where you're like, I don't want to antagonize this guy.
Yeah.
So that he comes looking for me.
Yeah. He doesn't seem like a stable person,
Right. After all this time and all of that work, though, wouldn't it be funny if the studio just pulled out? We're just no, I don't think so. We're not doing this now.
They would have just written another book about it.
Yeah, Robert
Graysmith did write a book about it called Shooting Zodiac. That's that I found. I just found it today, or I probably would have tried to read it too. But it's all about this investigation process. He ends the book when the movie gets officially greenlit. So the book is actually about the further investigation into the case that was the result of them working on the movie.
Nice. I did not know that.
I know, it's pretty cool. I kind of want to read it now.
I do remember one thing too that Vanderbilt talked about, that Fincher shared a office with his buddy Andrew Kevin Walker, who we talked about all through this series. He talked about, after all this time, he said anytime he was in the office talking to Fincher, anytime Walker would walk by, he'd be thinking, okay, there's the guy that's gonna rewrite everything I'm doing right now. And, I guess Fincher taunts people with that. I don't know. One of the things about Vanderbilt, though, he did say in the process of working with Fincher, like he says you work with some directors, they all want to just end up rewriting the shit themselves. But one cool thing about David Fincher is he just expects you to be good at your job. That's what he wants. And so he wants you to figure it out. So he's like, even that's with the script, that like, if there's something he needs, I write it, he'll look at it. If he doesn't think it works, he'll just say it doesn't work. And then I have to go back and try again. And I come back to him until he's like, this is okay. Yeah. Good. Just kind of interesting about their relationship.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And that's very telling about David Fincher, I think. And I think that we've seen that throughout this whole series, like with the way that he collaborates with people, that he just tries to hire the best people possible and expects them to do the work, to do the job.
Exactly.
Well, the shooting script they were working on eventually swelled to a whopping 202 pages. Now, generally speaking, I don't know that we've ever mentioned this on the show before, but generally speaking, 1 page of screenplay equals 1 minute of screen time. So, you do the math on that. And that length proved to make the film a hard sell. Fincher and Fisher originally approached MGM to finance the film, but talks with that studio fell through because MGM insisted on the final runtime being fixed at no more than 2 hours and 15 minutes. Eventually, Warner Brothers and Paramount, who had been developing The Curious Case of Benjamin Button with Fincher, agreed to co-finance the film, and they were willing to be a little bit more flexible on the runtime, although they did show some concern about how, dialogue heavy the film is, how light it is on action, and of course its inconclusive ending. As Fincher later said to Entertainment Weekly, he said, "People talk a lot in it. It's about a cartoonist and a murderer who never got caught. So yeah, the studio is nervous."
He knows how to sell a movie. So there you go.
Say less, David Fincher. I'm there.
Well, yeah, it feels like a movie where like Melissa McCarthy would team up with someone.
So anyway, the ball was still rolling on this. They had funding. Zodiac was greenlit. It's officially underway. Now, in his commentary for the movie, David Fincher mentions that one of his first conversations that he had when he began casting the film was with Jennifer Aniston, although he doesn't really go into detail as to what the nature of that conversation was. Like, was she up for a role? There aren't very many big roles for women in the film. The biggest is probably the part of Graysmith's wife, which went to Chloe Sevigny. But even that's a relatively small part, probably too small for Aniston to consider. It's honestly kind of too small for Chloe Sevigny. But regardless, during the course of these conversations, Aniston gave him some suggestions for some actors that he should consider, both of whom she had co-starred with in the past. And those actors were Jake Gyllenhaal, who'd been Aniston's co-star in The Good Girl, and Mark Ruffalo, who'd appeared with her in Rumor Has It.
You can try to Google search to get some more information, just like Google search Jennifer Aniston and Zodiac for research, but I'll save you the time. She was born February 11th, 1969. This makes her social Aquarius sun with a feisty Sagittarius moon. So if that's what you wanted to know.
Thank you. I mean, I didn't need to know that, but I'm glad that I do.
Yeah. Do you want your horoscope for today? I could give it to you if you'd like.
It's okay. I'm a Scorpio, and
I know
that's all I know about my zodiac, about astrology.
I am Leo. So for anybody wondering out there, Graysmith, by the way, on the script, I meant to say, was shown it by Fincher and Vanderbilt, and said he had the opportunity to read it, and he said his only real note was, "God, now I see why my wife divorced me."
So it was Jake Gyllenhaal's performance in Donnie Darko in 2001 that Fincher saw the most potential. He saw qualities in him in that film that he thought would make him a good choice to play Robert Graysmith. Fincher described Gyllenhaal as an interesting double-sided coin, saying that he can do that naive thing, but he can also do possessed.
The important thing to know about Jake Gyllenhaal is that he was born on December 19th, 1980, meaning our man has a Sagittarius stellium with his sun Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Neptune, all in the mutable fire sign. His moon is in Gemini, which also forms a trine with restrictive daddy planet Saturn, giving him an emotional gravity that translates beautifully to his acting roles while speaking to a childhood traded too soon for the pressures of work. That's courtesy of whoever's doing those on the New York Post.
Do you know the time that he was born? Can you get his birth chart put together for us, Gary?
I should work on that. I'll see if he wants to link up and we can really get him read.
So Mark Ruffalo, Fincher thought, would be best suited for the role of David Toschi, who was one of the police detectives investigating the Zodiac murders. When he was first sent the script, Ruffalo wasn't particularly interested, but Fincher urged him to meet with him about it, which Ruffalo agreed to do. And then during their meeting, Fincher explained to the actor that he was in the middle of a rewrite that would make Toschi a more significant part of the narrative. After reading the revised screenplay a little bit later on, Ruffalo decided to sign on.
Yeah, well, Mark Ruffalo, also a Sagittarius. Coincidence? Probably. November 11th is his birthday. Guess who else shares? Oh, yeah, look at that. Guess who else shares that birthday?
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Sure. Also, Jamie Lee Curtis.
Jamie Lee Curtis and me have the same birthday?
Yeah, and guess what? Jamie Lee Curtis is Jake Gyllenhaal's godmother. Coincidence? Probably two. Yes. Also, yes. But my favorite thing about Mark Ruffalo here is that it feels like a real breakout for him because it probably led to all this other stuff like the MCU and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because early 2000s, Mark Ruffalo had gone from, he had like small roles in like movies all over the place, but
yeah, let's not discount his work in 13 going on 30, Gary.
Well, I was going to say before early 2000s. Early 2000s, Mark Ruffalo had become like the rom-com guy. Like he was in 13 going on 30, just like Kevin. Yeah, rumor has it. But I know he had like a whole thing about not wanting to be pigeonholed. Actually, he built his career step by step without experiencing a meteoric rise to fame. It seems to be a match to a nature which is clearly described by Virgo, the dominant sign of Ruffalo's natal chart. Even though he is a Scorpio with a Sagittarius ascendant. I did see an interview with him that blew my mind. He said coming into the movie, he said that they were meeting with his agent and he said, quote, "I'll never forget when they were negotiating my deal for Zodiac. The studio negotiator literally said to my manager, look, we don't give a shit about Mark Ruffalo. We don't even want Mark Ruffalo in this movie. So you're going to take what we're offering you or forget it."
Wow. What a boost to your confidence.
Right. And he probably got lowballed, but he made a gamble on it. And he may be my favorite person in this movie. But
he's fantastic. I love his performance in this.
He did get really serious too about David Toschi. First thing he said he did was go and meet with him and spend a few days with him. That whole thing we were talking about earlier with Dirty Harry, he said that's totally legit. He said just like watching it, seeing them just say like, okay, well, you're going to go free, but I'm just going to kill you. And it's that easy. The audience starts clapping. He said it was frustrating for the guy, like just seeing that happen, especially living it. He said Toschi was more proud of being the inspiration for Steve McQueen in Bullet. Ruffalo said he had like a framed picture of him and Steve McQueen and everything, and I thought that was kind of
wow.
But he said that the biggest thing that he tried to push for him was that you could tell he was like a real family man and he adored his kids, and he was very particular during the case to not let his family be impacted or ruined during the process of this. So he wanted that to be clear. He talked about his wife didn't want her name mentioned on it. They were kind of done with the whole thing, so they didn't say her name. He said he added like the lines about like his daughters that would happen in the movie, that like when Jake Gyllenhaal comes to him in the middle of the night or whatever, and he's like, go downstairs, and he's like, my daughters are upstairs sleeping or whatever. And he was trying to express that he wanted to give him that real family man aspect, that how much he cared about this not intersecting. And he said he even brought him the script ahead of time too, to like let them read it to make sure there was nothing like weird or prickly for them that they wouldn't want mentioned. I thought that was just kind of neat of Ruffalo.
Yeah, very cool. So for the role of William Armstrong, which is Toschi's partner, Fincher knew that he needed, in his words, the most decent person he could find, explaining that this character would be the balance of the movie. In a weird way, he said, this is a quote from Fincher, "This movie wouldn't exist without Bill Armstrong. everything we know about the Zodiac case, we know because of his notes. So in casting the part, I wanted to get someone who is totally reliable. And after meeting with the real life Armstrong, Anthony Edwards immediately came to mind.
Yeah, he called him nice and decent, and then thought of Anthony Edwards, who I guess during that time would have been like way bigger, but like, where has that guy been? Like, I feel like he was like he was huge for a minute. Yeah.
Well, he was on ER, so he was really big for ER, I think, more than his movie career.
Yeah, that's what I would know him from. It's just that. But anyway, it just feels like I haven't seen him much in a long time.
Yeah, maybe he retired.
Apparently he's in one episode of Tales of the Walking Dead. I just looked it up just now. But
oh, good.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, all right, whatever. That went nowhere.
Well, really glad. Sometimes that's what happens when you start looking into things. There is no good answer. And of course, rounding out the main characters of the movie, we've also got Robert Downey Jr. as San Francisco Chronicle reporter Paul Avery. I don't have any good stories about him. He just, I guess, got the part by auditioning. Maybe Fincher just liked him in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. I don't really know. there aren't any good stories about that. But
for continuity's sake, we'll say that. We'll say
sure, yeah, why not? Yeah. So 3 of these 4 characters, I think you could consider the movie's protagonist, or at least its main focus. Bill Armstrong, he's obviously a very important figure here, but he functions more as a supporting character. But I think one of the unique things about Zodiac to me is how it uses these 3 protagonists, all of whom are addressing the same problem, trying to solve the Zodiac case, but coming at it from slightly different angles. And with the way the film's structured, it sort of focuses on each of them at different points in the film. I mean, obviously, they're all throughout the film, or at least, especially Jake Gyllenhaal is all throughout the film. But the movie kind of changes its focus here and there. Because like early on, the first, I don't know, half an hour or so of the movie, the film kind of functions primarily as a newspaper drama. Big shades of All the President's Men there, of course, with Paul Avery as almost the central figure. Obviously, Jake Gyllenhaal's in there as well, but he has a different function in the early part of the movie than he does later on. But, you've got all these meetings with the editors and the publisher and all these different people about what we should put in the newspaper. It's a newspaper drama, like All the President's Men, or like, the Post, or what was that one that Spielberg did a few years ago? Or maybe that was the Post. That was the Post. Yeah. It's that kind of movie at first. And it's also during that part that we actually see the murders. But Downey, by the way, is, I think, really fantastic here. All of the leads are fantastic in different ways. But, this was made after Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which was the movie that sort of, if you go back and listen to that episode, we talk about this, but it kind of marked the beginning of his comeback. But this was also a year before he appeared in Iron Man. So he wasn't on that level quite yet. And, I love Downey as Iron Man, but his appearances in Marvel movies, they largely capitalize on how good he is at being snarky and how charismatic he is, and which he obviously is. He's very funny. And Zodiac, to me, I think it uses Downey in a similar way that Kiss Kiss Bang Bang did, only to an even larger extent. Because in this movie, he's got all that charisma and charm, and he's funny and he's sarcastic, all the things that we like about Robert Downey Jr. and that we like about Tony Stark. But there's also this dark underpinning that most of his Marvel appearances haven't really allowed. And I think it's a really great performance from Robert Downey Jr. here that doesn't get discussed, I think, often enough when people talk about his career.
There is something always charismatic about Robert Downey Jr., even if he seems kind of sleazy. He like kind of he has this like charm to him. He seemed it's weird because you would think that he would have more trouble working with a guy like Fincher, because it feels like he's probably off the cuff way more than other actors. But,
right, yeah.
But I mean, from all I've read, I think him and Fincher did get along okay.
Yeah. It seems like they did, and Fincher did allow him to like have input, which is something that he didn't really do with anyone on Panic Room. Like the scene where Mark Ruffalo knocks his planner or whatever it is out of his hand. He makes kind of a big show of picking it up in front of the taxi cab. The taxi cab has to slam on its brakes and all that. That was something that was, I think, Downey's idea that he contributed, and Fincher went along with it. As opposed to some on Panic Room where he didn't really allow for a lot of collaboration on things like that. But Fincher's being a little more flexible here, which I think helps when you're working with someone like Robert Downey Jr. probably.
Right.
But then, as the story progresses, we're introduced to Mark Ruffalo's Toschi. He doesn't come in until about a half an hour into the movie. And that, Toski's a really fascinating figure in his own right, because like we've mentioned, he's literally the cop that Steve McQueen fashioned Bullet after. So I feel like a lot of directors would have just centered the whole movie around him. And he does become the central figure of the movie for a big chunk of the movie, the biggest chunk of the movie, really, because what Fincher does here is he waits. Him and Vanderbilt, I should also give Vanderbilt credit here. They wait until Zodiac has been well established, and we see all the murders before bringing the detective in. And we first meet him when he is investigating the murder scene of Paul Stein, the taxi cab driver. We kind of spend the biggest chunk of the movie following Toschi and Anderson as they conduct their investigation, which turns the movie into more of a police procedural while showing us all of the jurisdictional bullshit that they had to deal with, which ultimately, led to the case being more difficult to work. I mean, one of the things that I love about the way that Fincher uses him in the film is that, the movie never really abandons Robert Downey Jr.'s character. It still follows him and Jake Gyllenhaal throughout all this part, but it does kind of shift its focus to Mark Ruffalo and just kind of folds him into the texture of the film, which I think is really cool. And like you said, Mark Ruffalo's performance here is just fantastic. I love how he's kind of quiet. I love his little weird animal cracker quirk, which I assume is based on something the real Dave Toschi did.
It was based on him, yeah.
Which I don't know. That's a fun little character quirk that it's like one of those that you couldn't write. You couldn't make up almost. It has to be based on a real person. Otherwise, it seems silly,
Yeah.
But the movie does something similar with Jake Gyllenhaal in the way it shifts its focus. I mean, we're introduced to him very early on. Maybe he might be one of the first characters we meet. But in the third act of the film, he becomes the primary focus of the movie as he takes the investigation into his own hands well after Avery and Toschi have abandoned it. And what's fascinating to me, and probably to Vanderbilt and Fincher as well, about Graysmith is that he has no real reason to go after the Zodiac. This kind of goes back to your question earlier, but he doesn't have any reason to go after Zodiac other than the sheer need to solve the problem. Graysmith just sees a puzzle, whereas Avery is kind of motivated by the prospect of fame, and Toschi by a sense of duty. He even says to Graysmith later in the film, he's like, "This is Zodiac's my job. It's not yours." Like, Graysmith doesn't need to. There's no reason logically for him to do this other than he sees this as a puzzle to solve. And he has to see it through to the end. Something that I imagine is highly appealing to Fincher, who has a similar obsession to details in games. And Zodiac's cast, while we're talking about it, it's also filled with a ton of great character actors, many of whom appear in small roles, sometimes just a single scene. And I think one of the most significant of those is Brian Cox, who plays the lawyer Melvin Belli. Cox, however, was not the original actor hired for the role. That part originally went to Gary Oldman, and they even went to the trouble of using prosthetics and stuff to make him up to look like Melvin Belli. But in the end, Fincher felt that the physicality just wasn't there, so they ended up recasting Brian Cox in the role.
He does say that he feels like they probably went a little too heavy on making Belli a blowhard, but that he was pretty happy with Brian Cox.
I mean, Brian Cox is great at playing a blowhard for sure. And I don't know much about Melvin Belli other than what's in this movie, but he did seem like a guy who liked publicity. He's worked some big cases and stuff in the past. But here's a fun little dumb fact that for some reason came to my mind. We always talk about different connections and stuff that we have in these movies. And, when I was watching this, I was like, hey, Brian Cox has been in a serial killer movie. He had his first kind of significant role was in Michael Mann's Manhunter, which is a movie in which he played a serial killer. It was Hannibal Lecter. He played Hannibal Lecter years before Anthony Hopkins played the character. And Manhunter was also released in 1986, which is the same year that Graysmith's Zodiac book was originally published. So it's a fun little synchronicity with Brian Cox in this part, I think.
That Gary Oldman thing is really weird to me because I can't imagine ever not using Gary Oldman. But I guess they have like a pretty good relationship. Douglas Urbanski is Gary Oldman's producing partner, and I guess he's in like The Social Network, and he's friends with Fincher. And apparently, like, those guys were like originally in talks to produce Seven, and they just passed on it because it was too dark. And so I guess Fincher, and I think, aren't they all in Mank or something like that later? So I think they all.
Well, yeah. Gary Oldman is the star of Mank, so they definitely like have an okay relationship. It seems like after this, this didn't harm anything. It doesn't seem like.
Yeah, just weird because Gary Oldman's the best, and so interesting. But Brian Cox also the best, so great.
Yeah, he's great, and he's perfect for this role, I think. We should also, since Todd's not here, we should mention that Melvin Belli, they do briefly mention it in the film, but he did appear in an episode of Star Trek. So that is in Star Trek, the original series, 3rd season, the episode, And the Children Shall Lead, where he played a character called Gorgon. That's all I know. I don't know why he was in Star Trek. He was not an actor. He was a defense attorney. Like, he was Jack Ruby's defense attorney, the guy who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. So, yeah, he's done some really big stuff. So I have no idea why he was in Star Trek. I'm sure if Todd was here, he would let us know.
But you can also find Todd over at Computer Resume Podcast, where he covers all of Star Trek in chronological order.
Really glad we're plugging for him since he's not here doing his
you can follow you can subscribe to his Patreon or something, and maybe he'll figure it out.
Anyway, so other small roles in the film included an overqualified Chloe Sevigny, who, as I mentioned earlier, plays Graysmith's wife, Melanie. John Getz from The Fly is in here in a small role. Elias Koteas, Dermot Mulroney, who you mentioned earlier as well. Adam Goldberg has a little bitty role. Philip Baker Hall, he plays the handwriting expert. Donal Logue, who plays Captain Ken Narlow. Apparently, Narlow's wife suggested George Clooney for the part, which is very sweet of her. But I looked up pictures of Ken Narlow, and he's definitely more of a Donal Logue type, let's say, more than a George Clooney type. And of course, Gary would be upset if I did not bring up Clea Duvall. Duvall plays a character, plays the convict Linda Del Buono. She knew one of the victims. She was friends with Darlene Ferrin, I believe. Another actress had originally been cast in that role, but when they shot her scene, it didn't work for Fincher, so they recast the part with Duvall and then reshot the whole scene.
Who could blame him? I cannot tell you how excited I was to see that queen in this movie. I had totally forgotten she was in it. So it was a nice surprise for me. Right after this movie, she goes on and does The Watch, which I watched not too long ago, which I may have mentioned before, but Roku kept suggesting it in the side of the channel menu. And so I finally clicked on it and watched it on like Fawsome or something. And
is that the one with like Ben Stiller and the guy from the IT Crowd?
No, I wish, but no,
what is The Watch?
It's about, she is a student and she needs some privacy. So she takes this job being out in the middle of a forest, like in a national park. And so it's supposed to be quiet. And she just is like the night watch, like in a treehouse kind of thing. And she's just supposed to keep an eye out, but she starts seeing ghosts and stuff. And that's all you need to know. And probably not watch it and you'd be fine. And it's, but you know, I love her.
You're a Clea Duvall completist. And to my credit, the movie I was thinking of is also called The Watch. So
I 100% remember that movie with Vince Vaughn. And no, that's, and I remember that movie being funny. So it was probably,
I never saw
choose that watch. Fincher. Oh, and I do in the commentary. Fincher mentions he wanted Elias Koteas for forever. Like he's always wanted to work with him since Seven. He'd been trying to get him cast in one of his movies, which I just thought was interesting, but it never worked out until Zodiac. I assume he's just a big Ninja Turtles fan,
or he loved him in Crash, because we know he saw Crash because he cast what's her name, Deborah Unger, in the game. So.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I just remember as Casey Jones, and that's always what I think of.
He will always be Casey Jones.
Right.
Another one of the film's more memorable roles went to John Carroll Lynch, who plays Arthur Lee Allen and gives a truly incredible and I think very chilling performance as the top Zodiac suspect. Now, Lynch is probably best known for playing Frances McDormand's husband in Fargo. You watched Fargo not too long ago, right? You've been on a little Coen Brothers kick. Yeah, so you know who I'm talking about. And that's a role that could not be further removed from his portrayal as Arthur Lee Allen here. Right. He's a really like nice guy, the doting husband, I think is what you would describe him as in Fargo. But and here he's scary, man. And this is easily one of my favorite performances in a film that's filled with great performances. He's only got a couple of scenes, only one real scene where he has dialogue. And that one, the interrogation scene, I think features some of Fincher's best work as a director, and it showcases. It's really a showcase not only for Fincher, but also for his editor, Angus Wall, who does incredible work in that scene. But what makes it work as well as it is the way that Lynch plays that scene. The way he changes his tone, like he starts out very cooperative, then he gets kind of patronizing by the end of it, combined with like these physical cues, part of which this is Fincher and Fincher and Angus Wall's work, but where he crosses his legs and flaunts his big work boots. He kind of shows almost maybe on purpose, shows off his Zodiac brand watch at one point, kind of lifts his sleeve up a little bit. He's kind of playing with it with his hand. It's really subtle little things like that. And then there's that flat kind of dead-eyed announcement at the end where he says, "I'm not the Zodiac, and if I was, I certainly wouldn't tell you." And he's like looking right in the camera when he does that. And it's like the way that he performs that scene makes us think that he could be lying, but we also equally believe that this guy is definitely like the Zodiac Killer, because there's something just very off about him. It's a fantastic performance. It's like one of those one scene wonder type of performances where he just comes in and kind of takes over the movie for a minute.
Yeah, well, and he's so good at portraying his creepiness, especially like I don't know, like that last scene of the movie, just the stare down thing
in the hardware store.
Yeah, in the hardware store. It's just like, this guy.
Yeah. In that scene, like he's able to put this look on his face somehow where you're like, I don't know if he's confused or if he recognizes Graysmith or if he's like pissed off. Like all of those things are true when you look at his face. It could be any of those. And I don't know how an actor does that, where they're able to contort their face in a specific way to convey multiple meanings the way that he does in that scene. Fantastic.
By the way, he's Twisty the Clown in American Horror Story, and in that season, that's a pretty awesome character, by the way.
I remember that. It was the carnival one, right? The sideshow.
Yeah,
sideshow
exactly. Freak Show.
I watched.
What it's called.
I think I watched about 4 episodes of that season, which is about as far as I usually get into a season of American Horror Story before that's completely shits the bed and I give up on it.
Past the first couple of seasons, it's always like I would watch the first half and then I check out. And
you're like, this is ridiculous.
And I did it for like 3 or 4 more seasons after that. I would watch the first half and check out. And I don't know why it was always that way, but it was. But I did want to mention that. But no, he's so good in this movie. He's also... I recently rewatched this, so if you haven't seen The Invitation it was like 2015. He shows up as a really weird guy in that movie and is very creepy as just the person that he is. Yeah, but anyway, and it's because he does look like a nice guy. He looks like he'd be a nice guy. He probably is a nice guy.
Yeah.
But for some reason, he's got real creepy face when he needs to put it on.
He knows how to do the dead-eyed thing. The Invitation from 2015, Karen Kusama, who directed Jennifer's Body, did it. Highly recommend that movie. It's amazing. I love it. Robert Downey Jr. in that same New York Times interview said, "I just decided that aside from the several times I wanted to garrote him, that I was just going to give him what he wanted." So he's just like, I think that's that same quote that where he mentioned the gulags was in that same interview as well, where he's just like, "Man, I've been through it. I will just do whatever it takes to get Fincher what he's looking for." So he just went along with it. It might have been annoying, but hey, that's the job. And Fincher's even said in interviews, he's like, "Hey, this is still work. Like you still have a job to do. It can't all be fun and games on set. When you get to the set, it's time to get to work."
It even goes back to, and I guess this is a good time. I mean, even that basement scene that they're talking about, I saw like how possibly frustrating it was for like Gyllenhaal and Fleischer but like you said, like Fleischer ended up, wasn't it Fleischer? You said just, it was like, then I just started having fun with it,
Yeah.
And
once he figured out that Fincher, that was his process.
Yeah. And then I think Gyllenhaal was like frustrated, but, and then everybody also like, I mean, this was the basement was constructed. That was a whole process. He ended up getting inspiration because it was Dermot Mulroney's basement. And they just rebuilt.
That they based it on.
Yeah, that they based it on. So they were just like rebuilding.
Wonder why he was in Dermot Mulroney's basement.
I don't know.
What are they doing down there?
I also saw with Dermot Mulroney, he thought when he got to set, like he was like, this guy looks too good. Like he is in really good shape. And so
talking about Dermot Mulroney.
Yeah, that Fincher
Did
thought
they-
he was in good shape and was like, I did not realize he was in this good of shape. We've got to do something about that. And
That's why they put a fat suit on him.
And they put a
'Cause
fat suit on him.
He's got a gut in the movie. Yeah, he's got a belly.
Yeah, they put a fat suit on him. He was like, I'm not
That's
buying
funny.
you this way. It's this like super good looking fit guy. And so, but yeah, and then they based the basement on his thing. But then it had, the same thing with Panic Room. Actually, I think like he had the setup of like movable walls and like different places to get the camera
that was built. That was a that was on a sound stage. That the whole house and the basement and the upstairs.
Right. And so I mean, and it just, oh God, I still love that scene. I can't stop thinking about it because it I've watched multiple videos about it and everything about like why it's so scary. And then and Jennifer, my wife, actually asked, like, after we watched the movie, she was just like, that was probably her favorite scene. It was the one that stood out. And she was like, as we were watching it, she was like, why is he there? What is he doing? Why is he going to the basement? All the same like horror cliche things. But
except it really happened.
Except it really happened. It 100% really happened. And Vanderbilt and Fincher said they couldn't understand why this happened because they were talking to Graysmith and they're like, why did you do that? And it's funny because I've seen it in other videos. Vanderbilt said, he told us, I don't know. Graysmith said, he was like, Graysmith is so polite. And he said, I just didn't want to offend the guy.
The possible serial killer.
Yeah, the possible serial killer. But so he did it. And it's funny because like this one video I was watching is like I think the video is called, if you look it up on YouTube, it is literally called like there aren't many basements in California. And and if you watch that, it's like how David Fincher sets up a horror scene. And David Fincher is not a horror director technically, but this is one of the great horror scenes, I would say.
Yeah.
And but he talks about in that video essay that he's doing that our fear of offending sometimes outweighs the fear of like what could be coming or something. And so like he's like so people put themselves in weird situations, and he said that he shows Fincher actually plays with that again in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. There is a scene where the guy like
with Daniel Craig, and Stellan Skarsgård, I think.
Yeah, Stellan Skarsgård, and he lays it out. He actually just says it all, like inviting him in to have a drink, and just like explains why he would come in and have a drink. And
it's good stuff. Yeah, that basement scene is just, I mean, it is obviously one of the standout parts of the movie. And like I said earlier, it's ultimately a red herring. Like it ultimately doesn't mean anything. But what I think it does, and the reason I think it's important, that scene, is that it shows you how deep into this obsession Robert Graysmith has gone, where he is so obsessed with figuring this out. Like he has to know if this guy, this Rick Martin or whatever, Rick Martel, I can't remember, Rick something, that Bob Vaughn worked with at the silent movie theater. He needs to find out whether this guy is the Zodiac Killer. So he's willing to put himself in that kind of danger because he needs that. He needs the answer. He needs that answer.
That was literally going to be the next thing I was thinking about, was just that I saw like a couple of Reddit threads when I was researching, and there was at least one or two that were like, what was the point of that scene? It feels like, it's a cool scene. They were like, it's a cool, like on its own, like as a short story, it's a cool horror movie, but like, what's the point of that scene in this movie? It doesn't do anything. It doesn't go anywhere. And I'm like, no. I was like, my argument even for the fear of offending someone would be exactly what you just said. I'm like, it shows you how obsessed he is with this, that he's gotten so deep that he is willing to walk into the basement to find out if he's found the guy.
Yeah, like it shows his psychology at that point. I mean, you see over the course of the movie, you see a big change in Jake Gyllenhaal's character physically. Like in the beginning, he looks like a Boy Scout, like his hair's combed, like he looks fresh faced. And by the end, like when he meets Clea Duvall, she tells him, when he says it's about Zodiac, she's like, "You've got the look." And it cuts to him and he's got like, his hair's all disheveled. He's got bags under his eyes. Like this guy has maybe borderline let's say an unhealthy obsession with it. I mean, we see it in the way his house is transformed too. Like his house is filled with files and books and everything. And Graysmith actually says that was that it looks less insane in the movie than it looked in real life, like with what his apartment looked like. He said they actually toned that down a bit.
Well, he's become like the Charlie Day meme, with the pins on the board, like all that shit. He's like a nut job. And no, it is an unhealthy obsession. It's fair to say that he destroys his whole family to just continue pursuing this thing. So,
and I think that the basement scene is the moment where we realize just, holy shit, this guy's willing to like do anything, no matter how stupid of a decision it is, to try to get to the bottom of this. Because going down to that basement is a truly stupid thing to do. It's something we would yell at people at in a horror movie, but he actually literally did it in real life.
Props to Gyllenhaal for being able to portray that, because he definitely has the look of like, as soon as the guy's like, I do all the writing myself or something like that.
Oh, it's so good.
And then the look on Gyllenhaal's face, he's like, I fucked up. I'm here.
Yeah.
This is it.
Yeah.
and
then right after that,
after
that is when you get there aren't many basements in California, and the delivery of that line with the way that Fincher shoots it, because he's got Charles Fleischer in the back, Bob Vaughn's in the back, kind of out of, like he cuts on a light, and I think it lights him in a weird way, but he's out of focus. Like it's scary the way that he does it.
Oh no, it's great. And Gyllenhaal does go from that look of, he knows he's fucked up. I just walked right into this.
Yeah.
But then also he still is like, well, I gotta know for sure.
Right.
And so he goes down there. Now he does immediately regret that, obviously. But
yes.
But he and that's even great. Like the run up the stairs and like trying to get out the door. He's like, I can't get out the door.
And the door's locked, and the way that that Bob Vaughn steps into that scene where we see his reflection in the mirror in that little mud room or whatever, also just super creepy. And it's a amazing scene. It's one of the best scenes that Fincher's ever directed, in my opinion, just from a sheer like craft standpoint.
Yeah, and it goes to, I think, I'm not going to say that everybody thinks this, but I think for a while there, I kind of thought that David Fincher was sort of a horror director. And now, like after this, really getting into the series, I don't think I could say that, but I could. No. Like, I think I could say like he could be, like he could. He could have been one of the best, and you can't classify him as a horror director. But you think of movies like Seven and stuff, and I guess he could get that rep, but he has scenes. Like he always fits like a horror element into, even The Game had a couple of things in it where you're like, this is creepy. Like this is,
oh sure. Yeah.
And it's just weird. He knows how to shoot one. I don't know what's stopping him.
Yeah. I would love for a full on, like just a crazy horror movie from David Fincher. Probably the scariest fucking movie you've ever seen. Imagine that basement scene, but it's 90 minutes long.
Well, I was gonna say, like, there was a part of me though that was like, is it that he could make a full length movie that is a horror movie that would be this amazing, or is it that he knows how to serve the story best, and he knows how this would juxtapose with the rest of the movie? That like
that's also true. Yeah.
Now you finally stepped at, like, this whole movie's about chasing a serial killer, and it's like, oh, it's about the process. It's about the process. There we go. Let's follow up on this. Let's do this. Now you're in it, motherfucker. Yeah. Now you found the serial killer. What happens now?
Now what? Yeah. Yeah. That scene, the basement scene almost got cut out of the film. We'll talk about the editing briefly here in a minute. But when they were trying to trim the movie down, one of the scenes that they discussed cutting was the basement scene, because when they were trying to, cut down the runtime, James Vanderbilt and him kind of looked things over, and Vanderbilt was like, I mean, you could cut the basement scene, and it's not gonna change the structure of the film.
Let's not credit these Reddit dudes who said the same thing.
Yeah, but they took that to Paramount, and they're like, well, we can cut the basement scene. And Paramount's like, are you fucking crazy? Like, that's the best scene in the movie. You are not cutting the basement scene, and they wouldn't let them do it, which is great, because I mean, Fincher and Vanderbilt both knew that it needed to be there from the the psychological profile that we get from Gyllenhaal's character during that scene, but they were willing to cut it if they needed to. And Paramount, the studio of all people, were like, "You absolutely not. This scene stays." So good on them.
I was about to say, I hate it when we have to give the studio credit. Come on.
So
they stood by it. That scene, that one scene, is like the thesis of what every other person thought they were going to get for the whole movie. I feel like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. So once the film wrapped in February of 2006, there was still plenty of work to do, because, it may be hard to believe at first, but Zodiac has more digital effects than any other film that Fincher had made up until that time, with more than 200 effect shots, including every single drop of blood that we see on screen. There is not a single ounce of practical blood used, not a single squib. That means that the splatters that we see during the murders, the pools and of blood, and the bloody fingerprints found in the aftermath, all CGI. And the decision to use CGI blood was a practical one on Fincher's part. He wasn't just trying to show off, because remember in Panic Room, we talked about, there's that scene where Dwight Yoakam is smashing the plaster ceiling with a sledgehammer, and how for every take, and of course, as we've discussed, Fincher does a lot of takes, for every time they did it, they would have to wait 45 minutes for the plaster to be reset. So it's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. And Fincher wanted to avoid those types of delays with Zodiac. And he knew that using practical blood effects would take longer, because they'd have to clean up the fake blood. They'd have to clean the costumes, or they'd have to have multiple costume changes. Every time you wanted to do a take, they'd have another take. They'd have to do another costume change. So he opted to use computer-generated blood for the entire film.
I did not notice it. I swear to God,
Yeah.
I did not notice it. And there are plenty of times in movies where I think that CGI blood is awful. Or it's like
absolutely.
very clear. And I have to say, for Zodiac, I did not know. I don't, until researching it.
That's the thing with most of the visual effects in this movie, is we're about to point out some more of them, but if somebody doesn't point them out to you, most of the visual effects in this movie you are not going to notice. And I think that's the sign of a good special effect. A good visual effect is one that the audience doesn't know is a visual effect. And that goes with the blood, but also, so the special effects on this were primarily handled by Digital Domain, which is, if memory serves, the company that James Cameron founded, right? Although, as there usually is on these big productions, there were a couple of smaller VFX companies that were involved, including Matte World Digital, who handled the establishing shots of San Francisco, where they had to create an accurate depiction of the city in the late 1960s. And although they don't immediately register as effect shots, several key scenes in the movie use CGI heavily, including the establishing shot of the San Francisco waterfront, where you see the port of San Francisco there. Because after there was a huge earthquake that destroyed a lot of that skyline, so they couldn't do it any other way. They had to recreate it in digital. But they do that. They do it there. They do the cab driving through the city, where the camera is straight over it. That would have just been impossible to do, even with a helicopter. And the fireworks-filled sky over Vallejo in the film's opening sequence.
Two of my favorite VFX things they had to do were they had to retouch the shot of like where the cars are crossing the bridge in Napa. Like they had to erase graffiti off of the bridge. He was like in the commentary, he was like, there's just a lot of profanity on that bridge. So we couldn't show that. Also, that when it showed Jake Gyllenhaal drawing something, he was like, we ended up putting like hair on Jake Gyllenhaal's fingers because he's very hairless and pretty. And it just didn't feel real that like his pretty hands were doing the art.
That's so funny. The residents of the San Francisco neighborhood where cab driver Paul Stine was murdered were, understandably against the idea of filming a recreation of the murder in their neighborhood. Plus, the area, of course, had changed pretty significantly since the time of the killing. So Fincher opted to shoot that entire sequence, the one where Mark Ruffalo and Anthony Edwards investigate the crime. That whole sequence was shot on a blue screen stage. So basically, they built a portion of the building. I think it was like the two houses and the street. Those were constructed on an outdoor stage in Los Angeles with a 150-foot blue screen put up behind it. And then production designer Donald Burt provided the visual effects team with detailed drawings of the intersection at Washington and Cherry as they had appeared in 1969. And they took photographs of every possible angle of the area using high-resolution digital cameras. And then the team used these photographs as a basis for CGI models of the homes, and then they would texture those with period facades so that they looked like they were from 1969, 1970. And the final shot includes CGI police motorcycles, squad cars, a fire truck, street lamps. All of that stuff is CGI. Well, not all of it. I mean, some of the cars in the scene are practical. They're there, but they added additional ones with CGI.
Movie magic is so fucking fun. I don't know. It's so weird. And this movie, like, you don't think about, like, I don't know, still I am still but a layman, Justin. And as I see all these things, I'm like, good God, like there is so much work that goes into this thing. He even talks about in that scene too, that it makes it easier for like the overhead view, like the crane going over there. He's like, I would recommend this with real power lines because you'll fuck your shit up or something, basically. But that scene, I did like that. His literal quote about it was why he thought it was memorable or should be memorable, as he describes. It was like the intention of this scene was, quote, a sense of detachment, God's POV looking down on something he has no control over.
Talking about the camera following the cab through the city. Well, there's something really off-putting about that as well, because I think because he keeps the cab centered in the frame the whole time, even as it makes corners and stuff, which would not be possible with a helicopter or a crane or anything to keep it that perfect, So I think there's something off-putting about it, because I think the audience subconsciously, even if you don't recognize it as CGI, you subconsciously know that this is an impossible shot and that there's something there. It kind of makes it feels ominous, like there's something bad's going to happen. Like you feel like there's just something off because of the way that he shoots it, which of course it ends with a guy getting shot in the back of the head. So.
That also was very frustrating too. The idea that the cops saw the Zodiac and like probably were like, just right there with him the whole time and just didn't catch him.
Yeah, and one thing I love about the investigation scene is that it is the only scene in the movie that is shot with a handheld camera, which was incredibly difficult considering they were shooting it all on blue screen and a lot of the background was CGI'd in. That's hard to do and make it look handheld. But remember, we've talked about how Fincher uses handheld very sparingly. It has to have a purpose. And I like the way he uses it in that scene, because it is the only time that we see Mark Ruffalo and Anthony Edwards like actively investigating a scene. So he wants us like right in there with it and feel the urgency of that scene. So he uses the handheld, and I think it works really well there. So Fincher's original vision for Zodiac didn't include a traditional film score at all. Instead, he wanted to create a tapestry of sound design using vintage songs from the time period, along with sound bites and clips from the local radio station. But as the film developed, sound designer Ryan Kleiss felt that there were some scenes that could benefit from a more traditional score. As a sort of temp track, he inserted music from one of his personal favorite pieces of film music, which is David Shire's score for Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation. And Kleiss was actually able to connect with Shire, and the composer was sent a copy of the script for Zodiac. By the way, Kleiss is doing this all sort of under the radar at the time, because they didn't budget in a score for this movie. because that was not part of the original plan. So he's having to kind of do all of this sneakily a little bit to talk to Shire, because they didn't have the money for a score. So they were going to have to find that money from elsewhere if he decided to do it. But he did it anyway because he felt like it was necessary. And they ended up setting up a meeting with Fincher. And Fincher told Shire that he'd only need like maybe 15 or 20 minutes of music. So after working on the score a bit, after watching the film and working on the score, Shire ended up with closer to 40 minutes of music. And it should also probably be noted here, since we're talking about David Shire, that he also was the composer for All the President's Men. So there's another connection to that film. That had to be a good selling point for Fincher too.
Oh yeah, for sure. There's no way he wasn't thinking of that.
Yeah. The remainder of the soundtrack consisted of popular songs from the era chosen by music supervisor George Draculius. It's a cool name.
He's a vampire.
It sounds like a vampire. It sounds like a German, or not German. That's probably Eastern European. Maybe?
Yeah. Like,
which is where vampires are from, right?
Romanian or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Fincher knew very early on that he wanted to use the Donovan song Hurdy-Gurdy Man to soundtrack the first murder. He had originally chosen a song called All Is Loneliness by the Janis Joplin band Big Brother and the Holding Company to play over the opening sequence that shows fireworks exploding over Vallejo while the car's moving along there. But Draculius found it to be too weird and creepy. He knew kind of that the audience was going to be walking into the theater already feeling sort of tense because of the subject matter of the film. Like, you don't walk into Zodiac not knowing that it's a movie about the Zodiac Killer. And he also knew that it's not going to be long before the audience sees two kids murdered in cold blood. So he thought it might be better to misdirect the audience, or to at least let them settle in before really freaking them out. And I have to kind of agree with Draculius on this one. If you go listen to All Is Loneliness, it is weird and creepy. Like he described it. It's a creepy little song. Even though we know what's about to happen, if we've got any clue as to what the movie's about, I think choosing something that was less ominous was a better choice. And Draculius managed to convince Fincher of this as well. And the final film includes Draculius' suggestion of the Three Dog Night song, Easy to Be Hard.
Yes, you're right. All Is Loneliness, I guess, would be too on the nose. Fincher also says in the commentary that, like, if you're like, for some reason when he got played that song Easy to Be Hard, he said he felt that it immediately transported him, I think is the quote. And so he just all of a sudden was like, I remember being a kid driving through Vallejo during this time.
Yeah. And that's a song that he probably heard on the radio.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know. So the soundtrack is weird. I don't know much about Donovan, I gotta say, but that guy keeps creeping up in my stuff sometimes, like where he gets suggested to me. Yeah, it's real weird, and it's probably because like Season of the Witch is on my Halloween playlist, and even though it's not my favorite song, because I feel like it's you got to pick up every stitch, and it's like,
sure. I mean, that's
over and over again.
That's his most well-known song. I mean, this one's probably up there, Hurdy-Gurdy Man, but mostly probably thanks to this movie, honestly. I don't know a whole lot about him.
And I don't think that I realized he did that song, and then hearing Hurdy-Gurdy Man, which, by the way, is very weird on the end credits and on the car scene.
Oh, yeah.
It works really, really well. What a weird fucking song. Who is this guy? What the fuck is his problem? I don't know.
The Hurdy-Gurdy Man definitely sounds like a creepypasta villain, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Like, that's the name of it.
Yeah.
Who is the Hurdy-Gurdy Man?
Well, like, what is going on with this Donovan guy? I don't know what his deal is. But the two songs now that I know of, I'm like, man, you are a weird fuck. Okay.
So Fincher's editor on the film was Angus Wall. We mentioned him a little bit before. He had also worked on Panic Room, where he shared editing duties with Fincher's go-to guy up to that point, which is James Haygood. And they started editing this film. It had originally been scheduled to be released in time for Academy Award consideration in late 2006. But when Fincher and Wall turned in a cut that ran 3 hours and 8 minutes long, Paramount urged him to make some cuts to trim it down, which delayed the release. And Fincher agreed to make a few cuts. There were 2 main scenes that got cut. One was a sequence where Armstrong, Toschi, and Jack Mullinax, which is Elias Koteas' character, they try to get a warrant to search Arthur Lee Allen's trailer. It's a scene that lasts several minutes long and consists of the 3 men talking to the DA on the speakerphone, which Fincher said that test audience, they hated it. The test audiences just hated that scene. He thought it was cool, but test audiences weren't into just 3 guys talking at a speakerphone the whole time. Another big one was that there was this 2-minute blackout montage of hit songs and news report audio that was designed to show the passage of time. Essentially, it's a black screen, nothing on the screen. It's a black screen with a super edit of songs from the period playing over, and the songs, move through time, different songs from different years, as we also hear them mixed with very well-known news reports that would indicate where we are in time. And that whole sequence was replaced with a simple title card that read 4 years later. Now, I will say, if you've got the director's cut, which I think is what you watched, right, Gary? The director's cut?
Yeah, I just...
both of those scenes are in there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just assume for it was strictly because of this series that I was like, if David Fincher has a director's cut, that's probably the one to go with. I don't know that you can always trust that in everything, but at least with David Fincher, like, I feel like that's a pretty safe bet. Like, if he was going to have a director's cut of something, roll with the director's cut. Because even with Alien 3, even though we didn't get an actual quote unquote director's cut, we got the assembly cut. But
sure.
In the commentary on this one, he talks about that he found, like, the speakerphone scene, for instance. Like, he was like, I thought it was funny and necessary. And
I think it's a great scene. Honestly, I love the speakerphone scene because I love the back and forth between all of them. There are similar scenes in All the President's Men. There's one scene in All the President's Men where Robert Redford is on the phone with one source. Then the guy hangs up on him. He calls another one. Then the other guy calls back. So he's having to, like, switch back and forth. But it's just like 5 minutes of Robert Redford talking on the phone. And it is compelling as hell. And I think this scene is kind of the same way. I think it's really compelling watching them go. And not only that, but they're almost like catching the audience up on all of the, like, details of the case so far.
Right. As they skip through time. Like, yeah.
Right. They're letting you know where we stand at this point by giving the reasons that they should be able to search Arthur Lee Allen's trailer. They're catching the audience up in case you missed anything, and just spelling it all out, which I think is great. And I think it's a great scene. I think the blackout montage is great. But I can also see why they would cut it. Some people would be weirded out by it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can tell you that watching it, when the blackout scene happens, I was like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
Like, I did have a moment of, this is an interesting way to do this. I don't think I was put off by it or, like, bothered by it necessarily, but I did have the thought, and maybe that's the issue, that if it takes you out of it for long enough to think about, like, wow, why is he doing that?
Why are they doing that? Yeah.
But
I mean, 4 years later, title card works just fine. But I think the blackout montage is kind of cool, but I 100% see why they would cut that, why it wouldn't work with most audiences.
I mean, if you had to pick out of things, like, I mean, if you were going to pair it up with the basement scene, definitely cut the blackout scene,
Sure. Yeah, definitely. That's the better choice. So contractually, David Fincher had final cut on this film. So he was really only making these cuts to play ball with the studio. Essentially, he could have turned in a 3 hour and 8 minute cut if he wanted to, because he was legally allowed to. But once he got it cut to a length that he felt was right, he refused to cut it any further. And the final film comes in at 157 minutes. I think the director's cut's 161. I think it's about 4 minutes longer.
It's weird. He almost does seem to have an understanding with the studio on this one. Even at the very top of the episode, when you were talking about how he said, well, it's about, a cartoonist and a police detective, and they never find the character, or, never find the killer or whatever.
Right.
It's like, he seems to have an understanding, like, this movie is not going to meet expectations, or like at least like what people think they're going to see. I feel like
Right.
they're going to feel misled. Some people are going to, and I probably did the first time I watched it, that, you know, you think about Zodiac and you're used to movies like that focusing on the sensationalism about the whole
Sure.
thing.
Yeah. I remember one review that I read. The guy, the reviewer, I can't remember who it was, but he was commenting that, and it was a positive review. He loved the movie, but he commented that his friend that he saw it with, when they walked out, his friend said that he felt like he had just spent 2.5 hours in a filing cabinet, which he was saying as detrimental to it. But it's like, okay, I get that, but because it is just a lot of information being thrown at you. It's a lot.
There's a weird thing where, okay, how do I put this? Because people are into true crime. Like, true crime's super popular. I think I said in 7 that David Fincher made true crime before true crime was a thing. Like, it feels like he was making a true crime movie. It's not a scary movie like I feel like some people want it to be or whatever. It's just like it's a procedural in a lot of ways on that movie. So some of it, I feel like, where am I trying to go with this? That, like, some people, I feel like your mindset is different, though, if you go into true crime, or you're like expecting a documentary about a cult or a murder or whatever. You know, like if you were doing Zodiac as a documentary, you would expect that to appear one way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there isn't. I love this movie, so this is not me trashing the movie. I'm just saying I could see people going into this movie thinking like, well, this is the movie version, so this is the fun killer movie, you know? Like,
right.
this is well, we keep saying it, the sensationalism. This is a different version of that same story, you know? Then you go to the documentary and you watch the real story about the investigation or something. I don't know. But at the same time, I mean, there are people that want to see the story played out as it happened, and I don't know where I'm going with this exactly, except to say I can see why people would be put off by this movie.
Yeah, if you're expecting one thing and getting another, but if you go in either with no expectations or with the correct expectations, then I think you're going to be rewarded, because I think it's a fucking incredible movie, and I think I think I like it more every time I watch it.
It's one of those things where it's like it's the argument for the movie, like just being like, if you go in like as a blank slate and just let the movie take you where it's going to take you, like, this movie is a great movie. It's
for a movie that's almost 3 hours long. It is so well paced, like it's never boring, even though most of the movie is just people talking. Like, it's so incredibly compelling to me, and that's a feat in itself for a movie to be this length with not a single action scene in it, you know. And it's, like I said, it's not funny. I mean, there are moments that are funny, but it's not a comedy. It's not an action movie. It's not even really a thriller, except for in really just that one sequence in the basement. It's a drama. This is a drama.
Yeah, there was a period of time, honestly, I remember the first time I watched it, that like part of the way through I was like, they forgot about Zodiac. Like, you know, there ain't nothing Zodiac about this. Like, what is
well, that's the thing. It's about the people investigating it more than it's about the killer itself. He's not glamorizing the killer at all. Fincher never wanted to glamorize the killer. He specifically chose to not shoot any scenes and the killings from the killer's point of view, because he said that it would just turn into a first-person shooter at that point. He didn't want the audience to be in the killer's shoes. He didn't want anything that would make the audience feel like they were associated with the killer. They didn't want a Michael Myers moment where people start pulling for the killer, because one, it's disrespectful to the real victims of Zodiac,
right?
But also, like, that is not what kind of movie this is. This is a movie about the people who are investigating it and the toll that investigation takes on all of them. I mean, Paul Avery's whole life is fucking turned upside down. He becomes an alcoholic and dies on a ventilator. Robert Graysmith's marriage falls apart. Mark Ruffalo's character, Dave Toschi, probably fared the best, but it definitely took a psychological toll on him.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who's, I mean, everything you read about him it feels like a guy who wants to do the right thing and be the guy who does his job as a cop, and can't, like, is failing.
Well, that's
at
the
it.
thing. Well, and the thing is, like, it's not that he's failing at it. It's not even that the system has failed. The system has worked. At the end, he makes that line, that remark to Jake Gyllenhaal about where Jake Gyllenhaal says, just because you don't have proof doesn't mean it's not true. And he says, hold on, Dirty Harry. Because in Dirty Harry, the system isn't working, and he takes matters into his own hands, and he shoots the Scorpio killer, and then he throws his badge into the water. And that's how the movie ends. Sorry if I just spoiled the end of Dirty Harry for you. But he knows that in real life, that's not possible. He has to go by the rules of the system. And in the system, he has to have evidence, and he doesn't have the evidence to put this guy away. Dave Toschi, from all accounts, Dave Toschi always believed that Arthur Lee Allen was the Zodiac Killer, but he couldn't prove it in court, and that sucks that this guy essentially got away with murder. But if he's the guy who did it, but that's the conclusion that he seemed to come to, and that's a heavy load on somebody to be able to know that there's a guy out there who murdered at least 5 people. I've got a pretty good idea this guy did it, and I don't have a way to put this guy into jail. So, and you see that weight on Mark Ruffalo's shoulders throughout the movie, which especially as the movie goes on.
Yeah, which is why he's so frustrated, why he's willing to help Jake Gyllenhaal's character through the whole thing too.
Yeah.
As casually as possible. Those are some fun scenes, by the way.
That scene in the diner where Graysmith lays it all out, and he's just like, when he puts the salt and pepper shaker down, he's like, Darlene Ferrin's house to Arthur Lee Allen's house is 50 yards. He's like, and he's just like astonished, and he goes, is that true? And the look on his face is like, holy fuck, like this fucking cartoonist, like he put together more than the FBI, the SFPD, and everyone was able to put together, but it's still, there's not enough to put the guy into jail, That's part of what I love about Mark Ruffalo's performance too, is that he portrays that world weariness of Dave Toschi.
100%. I mean, it's funny you said it exactly that way, because I saw those same things about his character as Bruce Banner and the Hulk. They were like, wow, he's really good. I swear, I remember seeing reviews about it. Was like, he plays a world weariness of for Bruce Banner that like nobody else has captured so far or something. I remember that. I'm like, I guess that's Mark Ruffalo's thing. He's good at that.
He's good at it. He's good at it.
But you're right. Like a guy who is just defeated because the world ain't Dirty Harry, and it can't just go shoot the dude he thinks it is.
Yeah, exactly. So Zodiac was released on March 2nd, 2007. It opened to a rather disappointing $13.3 million its opening weekend. Came in number 2 at the box office, just behind the Tim Allen, John Travolta classic Wild Hogs.
I was waiting for this. Like how... I think even in 2007, we were asking ourselves how.
Like, what the fuck?
That's where I'm going with that. Like, who knew this market was still here?
Wow. In its second week of release, it saw a decline of about 50%, which sounds bad, but it's not as bad as it sounds. It's actually fairly normal for a movie to drop off significantly in the second week. But unfortunately, it was also facing even stiffer competition that week in the form of Zack Snyder's 300, which was a massive hit.
Yeah, I was going to say, I could give them that. People still talk about 300, its memes and everything. It's survived into the current generation, but nobody's talking about Wild Hogs.
No, nobody's clamoring for Wild Hogs 2. Hogs Gone Wild.
But now they are.
So All in all, Zodiac grossed just $33 million in the US and $51 million elsewhere, bringing its worldwide total to just $84 million on a budget of around $75 to $85 million, depending on where you read. So didn't do very well.
Son of a bitch, David Fincher.
I know, yeah. But that's the thing. Several of his movies have done this. Well, I mean, Fight Club definitely did this, where they underperform, but then they're so good that people just keep talking about them, years and years later. I mean, it doing poorly at the box office wasn't due to poor reviews. Zodiac received some of the best reviews of any Fincher film that we've discussed so far on the podcast, and is to date his second highest rated film among professional critics, with only The Social Network receiving more accolades. In fact, I think, this is just me speculating, obviously, but I think that if Zodiac had been released the previous winter as it was originally scheduled, it may have been a major awards contender. I mean, it would have had some stiff competition. The Best Picture winner that year was The Departed, which is, Martin Scorsese. It's a great movie. But the rest of the Best Picture lineup, I think Zodiac could have squeezed in there.
I literally went into this movie, after I watched it, I looked up what awards it won. I swear to God, I went to go see and was very disappointed that it won
Not a lot.
best director at the Dublin Film Festival or something.
Yeah.
And I was
What?
But really?
Otherwise,
That's
it didn't win many, and I think it should have, or I think it should have at least been nominated for some stuff, But the year that it came out, 2007. All the Academy Award talk centered around There Will Be Blood and No Country for All Men, which are both incredible films. I mean, that's one of those years in the Oscars that you always remember, because it's like, shit, either one of these deserves to win this because they're both masterpieces. And also, by the time that the nominations were being announced, Zodiac had already been out for a year, because they announced those the Oscar nominations in March. So it had already technically it was able to be a contender for the Academy Awards that year. But once you're that far removed from the conversation, that's why so many awards contender or potential awards contenders come out in December, because they want it fresh in Academy voters' minds when they come to nominate things come February or so, So as a result, Zodiac did not receive a single Academy Award nomination. Not one. Not for acting, not for cinematography, not for direction, nothing. Not a single Academy Award nomination. And I think that in most years, if this had been released at the right time, it would have gotten all those. It would have gotten best score. There are so many different, even best visual effects. It wouldn't have won because that award tends to go to more showy visual effects, but it could have been nominated. It's a shame that it was overlooked the way that it was.
This movie is going to be this movie is already a movie that if you go back and watch it right now, you're already saying, how'd they fucking put this cast together? How did
they, even though people with one or two scenes, are why is Dermot Mulroney in a role where he's got 10 lines? Not that he's a big movie star, but he's a big enough movie star to have a bigger role than that. It's just it's really nuts, honestly.
Just the random characters that show up. How is Clea Duvall not the lead actress solving the murders?
Exactly.
That's what I would.
I mean,
say.
you've got Bruce Banner, Tony Stark, and Mysterio as your leads, all guys that are huge movie stars, and they're just all sharing the lead credit in this one.
And some of the best character actors ever playing the characters in the movie.
Yeah.
It's just it's every actor's a banger in this one.
Yeah. Adam Goldberg shows up for one scene where he just acts like an asshole and calls it a day.
Right. It's impressive. I don't. Yeah, I really did watch it this time around and was like, oh, it won awards that year. What were they? I can't remember. And I went to look and was like, wait a minute, I made that up in my head.
Yeah, that was some Mandela effect shit.
Yeah, I was like, okay, nobody's talking about Zodiac in award season. That's real weird because it should have been.
I mean, on the surface, Zodiac feels very different from what Fincher's done in the past. But when you think about it, it's a story that's, I think it's really well suited for his style of direction, which includes the meticulous planning of every single detail. I mean, other movies that he'd done in the past, like The Game and Panic Room, those are very, I'd say, carefully plotted thrillers. And that careful plotting and how Fincher portrayed it on screen is a big part of what makes those movies work. One of the books that I've been reading along with this series, I haven't really used it as a source necessarily because he doesn't get into a ton of behind the scenes stuff, but I just like this writer's work. His name's Adam Naiman. He works for The Ringer, but he's written a book. I think I've mentioned it on at least one other episode on this series. It's called Mind Games, the films of David Fincher. And he's talking a little bit about this in the book, how Fincher's using that careful plotting and that meticulous planning. But he says that, quote, what Zodiac represented was an attempt to redirect those skills in the service of authenticity, which I think is hitting the nail on the head as far as the way that Fincher approached this film.
Yeah, I don't think we've said it better than that.
Yeah, that's why he's a professional writer and we're not.
Right.
That meticulous obsession to detail, though, I think not only serves the film and serves its authenticity, but it also mirrors Robert Graysmith's own obsession with the Zodiac case. In his quest to uncover the truth, he left no stone unturned to the detriment of his own safety, as we discussed in the basement scene, and ultimately to the detriment of his own marriage. His hope, as he states in the film, Jake Gyllenhaal says it in the film, his hope is that in publishing a book on the Zodiac, it might drum up enough interest to solve the case that maybe with enough details out in the open, the public might be able to solve it in a way that the police couldn't. Of course, that's never officially happened. And although theories about the Zodiac persist even to this day, the book comes to the conclusion that Arthur Lee Allen was most likely the Zodiac. Likewise, I think, you touched on this earlier, but when Fincher's film was released in 2007, it drummed up further interest in the case. And through his own research, Fincher seemed to come to the same conclusion that Graysmith did, was that Arthur Lee Allen was very likely the killer. Although Fincher leaves room for doubt, I kind of like that, in that final scene of the film, Mike Mageau, who's now played by Jimmy Simpson, from, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, among many other things. But Jimmy Simpson comes into that scene, and he identifies Allen as the man who shot him. Although when he's asked how sure he is, he says 8 out of 10, which seems to be Fincher's way of not fully committing to that. He's like, I don't want to fully say this guy was the Zodiac killer, but I'm pretty sure this guy was the Zodiac killer.
He says in the commentary, at the end of the commentary, he says, there's people who say we don't have a conclusion to this movie. It's something like this. He's like, there's people who say we don't have a conclusion to the movie. I don't feel like they're watching the same movie necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, the movie, like, the killer doesn't get arrested, certainly, but the movie seems to come to the conclusion that Arthur Lee Allen is the killer. I mean, it presents a pretty compelling case, just as the book did.
He's just going to go free, and nobody's going to go pop a cap in his ass like Dirty
Harry. Right,
Harry.
exactly. That's the thing, is that it's not like Dirty Harry, and that, I think, is what some viewers see as an inconclusive ending. But Fincher, like Toschi in the film, seems to believe that Allen is the killer, but also knows that he doesn't have the hard proof to convict him. And that's not your typical Hollywood ending. These type of movies tend to end with Dirty Harry saying, do you feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? And then shooting the guy with a magnum, right? But
Right.
Fincher's sort of subverting the genre. And in doing so, he's being true to the actual story of the case, where somebody somewhere, whether it was Arthur Lee Allen or not, somebody somewhere got away with murder. And that's just the truth of what's happened with the Zodiac case. And that's the truth that Fincher's presenting. And I don't know that any other director could have or would have even tried to pull that off the way that Fincher does here. I don't even know if Fincher would have pulled it off had he made this movie earlier in his career. But Fincher, we know he's had the goods from the get-go. Like, 7 is proof of that. I forget Alien 3, that was compromised. But 7, as his first true vision, proves that he knew what he was doing from the get-go. But there's still a maturity with his work here that comes with experience, an ability to be subtle but still impactful that only a director with a combination of Fincher's skill and experience at this point in his career could have pulled off. And in that way, I think Zodiac is a culmination of everything Fincher's done so far, And it is, and at least in my opinion, one of his very best films. I mean, I would put this probably in the top 2 or 3 David Fincher movies if I'm ranking these.
I think if I had to say, like, pick a best film, like the film that you would submit toward, like, for the critics or whatever, this is the movie. Like, if this is for the Academy, this is like his magnum opus. This is his best movie that he's made so far, for sure.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
I mean, I love all of them that we've covered, and I don't know, probably the one I would rewatch the most if I had to pick one, maybe 7 or something like that.
Yeah.
Possibly Fight Club. Like, I would rank it totally different there because this movie's like 3 hours. But if
Right,
you're
yeah,
talking
not the one
about-
you're going to revisit, but pure quality.
Yeah, like quality, like art, like this guy did something here. This is this is the best film he's done.
Yeah. And over time, Zodiac has continued to be considered one of Fincher's greatest films. Despite the fact that it didn't do well at the box office, it's had legs, and it's seen by many as sort of a transitory film for him. It'll never have the following that, a twist-filled thriller like Seven does, or a movie like Fight Club does, where it just like nailed the zeitgeist and became a cult sensation, at least among average moviegoers. But for fans of his work, Zodiac stands as the point where Fincher moved on to more, quote unquote, serious work. At least that seems to be kind of the narrative that people like to put on it. But, Fincher followed up Zodiac with The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which feels like his first stab at Oscar bait almost, although he was actually working on Benjamin Button before this. And we'll get into that maybe one day if we talk about that movie. But he was working on Benjamin Button before this, and it fell through. And then part of the deal he made with Paramount on this movie included Benjamin Button, etc. But in Benjamin Button, I think it's much better than early reviews would have you believe. It's a pretty good movie. And then after that, he made The Social Network, which is a film that legitimately was an Oscar contender and is considered by many to be not only Fincher's best film, but one of the best films of the 21st century. But then he did The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and he did Gone Girl, both of which are very good movies. But they're both movies that definitely fit in more of like the pulp fiction wheelhouse of his earlier work, like Seven. I mean, they're both based on books that are like people read at the beach.
I was literally about to say the same thing. The guy has made plenty of movies since then that have been like those kind of. You said it best. Yeah, the books at the beach,
paperbacks that you buy at the airport and read on the plane. That's what those are. But the thing with Fincher is, I think the thing that we've learned about him is that he's a director who just does whatever the fuck he wants, whether it's a home invasion thriller, satirical scree against masculinity and capitalism, a true crime drama about a real life serial killer, or the story of the dude who wrote Citizen Kane. He just latches onto whatever story he feels is worth telling. And few directors out there know how to utilize the tools necessary to tell those stories in the way that David Fincher does. So while it's kind of hard to fit David Fincher into a box, he's not a thriller director, although he's directed some of the best thrillers of the last 30 years. He's not a horror movie director, although, as we've mentioned, the one scene in this movie is one of the best horror movie scenes ever, honestly. You can't box him as the director of a specific type of movie. But one thing I think we've learned over the course of the series is that no matter what kind of story he's decided to tackle, he's going to bring his A game. He's going to play by his own rules, no matter how many people he pisses off. And he's going to do whatever it takes to bring his meticulous vision to the screen. And that's what I love about David Fincher. And I hope that we get to revisit him again one day, because I want to talk about The Social Network real bad on this show.
I've never seen The Social Network.
No shit, really?
Really?
Gary, it's on HBO Max right now. You should watch it.
I've never seen The Social Network. Yeah, what I just thought of was, I think I said this during Jodorowsky. This is his like gallery film. Like I don't know if that's a term we could use, but like this is the one that you hang up in the art gallery.
Yeah,
this is that one where it's like, this is, at least at this point in his career.
Yeah,
like this is that movie. Like you could, I would say Fight Club's like right there with it, like close behind it. But And again, for me, 7 is the one I would watch the most. I
I love
feel
7 so much.
Yeah, I do too, and I feel like it's the most watchable repeatedly.
Mhm.
And Fight Club's so interesting and weird that it's there, but like this is just a beautifully, perfectly done. Just I keep saying it, but like just film. Like
Yeah.
that it's the one you would call a film. You know,
7 remember we talked about that during Panic Room about his distinction between films and movies. Like this is the
Yeah.
best this is the best film we've talked about from David Fincher so far. 7's maybe the best movie we've talked about so far.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it. That's our David Fincher series, Gary. We are done talking about this guy for now. We're going to move on to another subject in a few weeks. But let's talk real quick about our next episode, because normally when we finish a series like this, we do a regular roulette episode where we randomly choose something to talk about. But we're going to do something a little bit different this time because we have got a live event coming up very soon.
We're not always sitting on our asses in our bedrooms chatting to you guys out in the ether somewhere.
Yeah, we do get out of the house. Yeah. And we've got a live event. This is our second live event. We didn't really promote the first one, which is on me, I guess. But the first one we did with our friends at Gut Punch, who we did the Nosferatu screening with back last fall. But we started a new series of screenings with them that are going to be hopefully monthly for a little while, called Cult Class, where we pick some of our favorite cult movies, and we kind of give we'll get up and give a little introduction, give some behind the scenes stories about it, not as in depth obviously as we go here, but enough to give you a little bit of insight into the movie, and then we show the movie. It's a screening. It's really fun. The first one we did was Reanimator, Stuart Gordon's Reanimator. That was last month. But on May 21st, if you are in the Greenville, South Carolina area or within traveling distance and are willing to come, you can come join us at a place called Coffee Underground. They've got a great little micro theater in there with a really great setup. I had not been there. I used to screen movies there years ago, and they have upgraded it significantly since then, which is great. So we're going to be there on May 21st. About 6:30 is when the doors open, 7 o'clock for the movie. And the movie we are showing for this edition of Cult Class is Richard Kelly's Donnie Darko. So we figured, since we're talking about Donnie Darko at the screening, we might as well talk about Donnie Darko on the show. So instead of doing a regular roulette episode, for our next episode, for our episode that kind of transitions between David Fincher and our next subject, we're going to be talking about Donnie Darko.
I can't wait for many reasons. For one, we're doing a live event, and I love the live events. It gives me life. I love seeing people in person and knowing you exist. And
you didn't get to go to the last one because you were out of town.
And I didn't get to go to the last screening, but I did enjoy Nosferatu. I still think about it to this day. That
was
live
fun.
event, that I had the most fun I'd had in a long time at that one. And also that we get to do Donnie Darko and stay with Jake Gyllenhaal. And it's a screening that's going to break my goddamn brain, because this movie... If you know anything about the show and you know how I feel about time travel and weird bullshit, then
yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to hear you rant about it.
It's Donnie Darko is gonna frustrate me. So.
Yeah, well, it's okay, Gary. You'll make it. Thoughts and prayers.
I'll get to blow my brain up on the night in Coffee Underground, and I'll get to do it again for the podcast for you guys.
Yep. So the episode will be out after that event. It'll be the next episode, but it'll be out after that event. So this is us asking you, if you are in the area, to come to watch Donnie Darko with us May 21st at Coffee Underground in Greenville, South Carolina. Tickets, if you want to buy them ahead of time, they are $10. You can get those through the Gut Punch Cinema website. That's gutpunchcinema.com. You can buy tickets the day of the event, but they're going to be $12, so you save a couple bucks by buying them online. But it'll be a fun time, man. Coffee Underground, you can have coffee. They serve beer. So if you want beer, you can have beer. You can have some lunch or dinner, I guess, at that point in the evening, and some pastries or whatever you want to do. It's a good little venue to host these screenings, and we're excited to be able to do it I think we're going to do the third Tuesday of every month here for the next few months. We're starting out with a couple of movies also that are Reanimator, Donnie Darko, have some, some name recognition. But rest assured, we're going to get weird with these screenings once we've established a regular audience with them. So we are working with our friends at the America Genre Film Archive and working with their catalog. So they got some gems, they got some weirdos, and the more events we can do, the weirder we're going to be able to get with them. So
I'm excited about this. And downtown Greenville's nice. So if you've never been there,
yeah, it's lovely.
Good time to show up.
Well, that's
Justin,
I guess that's
Justin will probably take you out. He'll probably buy you all your drinks at a bar across the street somewhere or something.
You think so?
No, I don't.
Thank you for committing me to that. I think that's all we have for this week, Gary. Where can you be found on the internet?
I am at This Is Gary Horne on all the social media stuff.
And I am at Justin_Bishop. You can find the podcast at Cinema_Shock on all your social media sites, including Instagram and Letterboxd, or you can find us at cinemashock.net. I do have links, I do have links to those tickets on the website, as well as links to our merch and our Discord, and of course all of our episodes and all that stuff. So until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather,
and be excellent to each other.